Kathy here, Brian
Here.
and Jeff.
Yeah.
And she does know that she should start recording this meeting.
Yeah, it's not recording,
Yep.
yeah. All
This
set.
meeting is being recorded. It is not being broadcast live. So as not to give away our secret sauce right away. We will not be taking questions from people who are present. People who are absent can watch the tapes as they go. Okay. Our first, we're doing the candidates in alphabetical order, and the first one is John Apple.
John.
Okay. Would you take a couple minutes and tell us what your background is and why you think that we would be a good fit for this town and the town would be a good fit for you?
Of course, Madam Chair and members of the board, first and foremost, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a honor to be before you today in your beautiful town of Manchester. I'm originally from the eastern shore of Maryland, from a small Chesapeake Bay town called Hubbard's Island. It's now primarily underwater. You can get to it maybe 2/3 of the year. They're dealing with sea level rise and sunny day flooding, if you will. Relocated over to the Atlantic coast around Ocean City, Maryland, and started my municipal career in Bethany Beach, Delaware. Prior to that, I grew up in a family of marine construction. We built marinas such as Sunset Marina of Ocean City, or Tread Avon Yacht Club in Oxford, if you've ever been to one coast or the other on the Delmarva Peninsula. It's very flat. It's a little different. But transitioned into local government, mainly for stability for my family. I had also started a aquaculture and seafood distribution company that is still in place today, just under another name. But I had sold that to an associate of mine who continues to thrive in that industry. Worked my way up in the ranks of local government to a point where the succession plan was to have me take the head spot in Bethany Beach. But we made a very hard decision to relocate to New England, mainly for a brighter future for my family. There's a lot more resources up here, industries, education, the whole nine. And we absolutely love the North Shore and the Seacoast area of New England. I took the position of town administrator in Atkinson, New Hampshire. Beautiful little town, has a lot of great similarities and comparisons kind of to the structure of Manchester itself. However, it is landlocked. It's not anywhere near the coast. But coming there, I was able to adapt very quickly and easily to that local form of government, which is also similar to your select board form here. With town meeting, we are an SB2 town.
You're going to have to explain that for those of us who haven't voted in New Hampshire.
SB2 is primarily two elections. So the first one is called a deliberative session, and it is pretty much exactly like your town meeting, where residents have to be there in person. There is no absentee ballot. You have to vote on your warrant articles, but it's mainly for the amendments. So they can tweak the warrant articles there on the floor, and then at the end, those final amended warrants go onto the ballot with the elected officials, and then you actually have your election. So it's very similar, but two elections.
Mm-hmm. And everything on the warrant has to go through an election. Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've got you off on a raffle.
But I just want to touch on, my desire for Manchester by the Sea and why I was drawn to this position. I've come to love public service. I've grown very quickly in public service. I do very well with it. And I did very well in a coastal community, handling many different strategic and capital projects, working directly under my town manager, and then coming to local government in New England and championing that right off the bat, sliding into that role seamlessly, and having to really raise the bar in Atkinson in terms of stopping employee attrition. We had a couple large lawsuits that were ongoing when I got there, so we were able to, within my first year, get past all of that and move forward. But my interest in Manchester aligns with both of my experiences, and as well as my professional aspirations. This is a job that I would want to be at for a long period of time and do very well in.
Thank you. I'm going to go off script for just a moment and ask you, if you were interviewing a candidate for town administrator, what would your first question be?
Well, I like introductions. I think the introduction is a great way to start, and it allows the candidate to share their personality. You get a feel for that candidate. The second is to dig a little bit more into their style. So it would be something aligned with what is your leadership style, or how do you feel like your leadership style would be a good fit for the town of Manchester?
Why don't you answer the second part?
Well, in seeing the different dynamics of Manchester and the different projects you have coming, things that are outstanding for Manchester that you would like to uphold and implement, I feel like my leadership style, which is leading by example and being inclusive and collaborative, would help tremendously with that. I know that some of the hurdles that you have here are dealing with a regional school district and a neighboring town trying to align on different things and come together in order to pass some major initiatives there. I come from a four-town school district where our budget is $90 million compared to the 32 million of Manchester, Essex. And trying to get all those together, and we've done very well in passing most recently a $25 million lease agreement for bringing up the facilities of the school district, and also in making sure that the voters know what is incorporated into the budget. We're giving our school representatives feedback and possible ideas on how to best pass that budget. But that all comes together under my collaborative approach to leadership.
Thank you. John?
Yeah. Good. It's great to meet you, John. You've touched on your leadership style a little bit. I'd like to know, in fact, all my colleagues would like to know a little bit more about your understanding of this job. You mentioned a couple of the challenges. Interested in what other challenges you think we face, and equally important, what are some of the opportunities you can exploit if you get this job?
Absolutely. Like I said, Atkinson's form of government, or New Hampshire form of local government, is still very similar to that of Massachusetts, specifically here in Manchester. And there's lots of different things that I'm aware of and in tune to that I could carry over into this position. Some of the issues dealing with are always meeting that Proposition 2.5 and making sure that we abide by that and fit underneath that. I see a positive in that because it gives you a goal. It's right up front. You can't go over this unless you're going to propose something extra and get your whole legislative body on board in order to pass that. What we dealt with in Atkinson, we have a official budget committee and a select board. And the official budget committee much like the Finance Committee of Manchester, gives their recommendations on money warrant articles, but they also handle the actual budget itself. It is their budget. So we have to propose a budget to the Board of Selectmen, carry that through, get their approval, but then also get an approval from the official budget committee. And that budget from the budget committee goes through. And coming into it, I think there was a lot of discourse between the two and trying to come together in order to meet a common goal and align on things to pass a budget. So by collaborating with both boards and being inclusive with both of them and asking, what is your goal? Where do you want to see your budget? What kind of increase do you want to see? We were able to do that, and we've had a lot better of a team response on developing the budget and passing it for our citizens. So I think that the levy limit of 2.5% gives us a goal that we need to abide by.
I think
Yeah.
it's a good lead into
Yeah, it's
finance.
a good lead into finance questions. Thank you again for applying for the position. So let's talk a little bit more about finance. We're interested in understanding your role in financial planning, which you've delved into a little bit. But could you outline for us what your philosophy is? So what is your fiscal philosophy? And can you give examples that illustrate that? And perhaps dig a little more or tell us a little bit more about how you approach finance in general, or everything from forecasting to the ultimate budget that's passed.
Certainly. My approach that I've brought forward and implemented in my current position has been to work collaboratively pretty much from the ground up and bringing in department heads and seeing from an early stage. I know that your process begins in November, I believe, in that we begin a little sooner, usually in the summer, but it's structured around the same elements. Working together with department heads to develop the budget, making sure that they've made me aware of some larger changes, and making sure that I communicate that to the governing body up front at the very initial stages of the budgeting process. So you would know what was coming, and start generating ideas on how to accommodate that or tweak different things. And that's done through that process with the department heads. Then we've implemented the joint workshop with both of the committees, as well as you do here in Manchester, as I've come to see, which we find to be very beneficial, making sure that both governing bodies are on the same page, asking great questions, making sure that department heads are part of that process as well so they can answer any questions. My role in all of that is understanding the budget from every aspect of it. If a department head isn't there during a meeting, I normally am able to answer any question related to the budget and the budget that is prepared, or I can very easily say, I can get right back to you on that, and I'll reach out and make that available. But it's making sure we have the details, explanations, clarifications, needs of those items proposed in that budget, gaining the feedback from the governing bodies, taking that back to department heads, and reworking things as needed to meet your expectations and communicating those expectations clearly. We just implemented a capital improvement program. The town hadn't seen one since 1999. So we just launched that and implemented, and one of the big things that came out in that is, well, what's the mechanism driving this? How do we actually implement this? You've got $7 million in the next 2 years. How are we going to handle something like that? So what we did was develop a way to look at our 5-year average of what types of capital projects and assets were funded through taxation, and how much was funded through our reserve or undesignated fund balance. And taking that and making sure that it's communicated clearly that we're not looking to raise that, go above and beyond that bar that's on a 5-year average been proposed to the voters, staying consistent, but divvying that same amount out to our different capital reserve funds. So over the course of 3 to 5 years, those items we can slowly pick off. That goes back to, Mr. Round, your first question about what are some advantages here? What are some positives we can take away from this? You have some very large capital projects leering in the future, but I think that your capital improvement program that you currently have, you have everything in front of you. You know what that is. It's just getting creative and how can we get there? How can we fund it without having budget shock to our voters?
Brian?
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Let's see. I'm very much concerned about the employees of the town of Manchester are the face of Manchester. Just one aspect of it, but we come and go. All right, you know, we're just place setters here, okay? Placeholders. Whereas the constant face would be the town administrator and department heads and the employees. So my question is, what do you think the most important qualities that you seek for in a town employee? And especially as if they want to move up into a senior position.
It's a great question, and I think that aligns with the way I answered my first question in leading by example, and that's being open to collaboration, the teamwork aspect of things, because it is a team for service delivery for the well-being of your community. Everyone shares that same goal, even though you have different departments. It is all about delivering outstanding forms of service, and everybody's on the same team to do that. And that's everywhere from public safety to library resources to your elder services program and transporting those folks to and from places that they need to go, making sure that everybody can do that safely. And I think that a great quality of a department head, a manager, is being able to work well with others on a horizontal and vertical structure, being open to all aspects of that. You're going to deal with many different kinds of personalities that have strong takes and standings on different subjects. But what I would facilitate on my end would be to ensure that everyone is aware of expectations and the goal of the end goal of what we need to do for the community, and to help with that collaboration and inclusiveness.
Right. Big question here. This is Massachusetts. Collective bargaining. What's your experience as far as dealing with strong unions?
We just passed our new police union contract that was a 5-year deal that had gotten drugged through COVID. It was a hard pitch to bring up. There were a lot of asks in that. We had other things that were on the ballot as well, and I was lead in that process. We got it through after some back and forth and some good talks, but got both the board and the budget committee to align on what those needs of the community are and why they are important. Going back to the employees being the heart of your organization here, and they make the ball go round. What I always communicate is if you lose a good team member, a great staff member that you know what they do, and they're paid well, you lose them, more than likely you're going to have to hire someone else that you know nothing about, and you're going to have to pay them more, if not the same. So how can we keep the ones that we have? And that's what that contract was all about. And that was the pitch we made, not only to our governing bodies, but to our legislative body as well.
Have you ever had to fire an employee?
Yes.
And how'd that go?
Well, we followed the process. I'm a policy guy, and having a policy in place and a structure in place that shows you, this is what you have to follow. You can give these many warnings. This is the authority on disciplinary action, which would be myself. Following that on paper makes it that much easier. So if there are any questions pertaining to it, we can just point back to that policy. But I mean, I had a beach ambassador. We had a code enforcement crew, but we softened that name to beach ambassadors. They would walk the beach and enforce different ordinances we had: no smoking, no alcohol, no canopies or tents on the beach, no ball playing unless the lifeguard said it was. I mean, you name it. We were strict about all of that, but having beach ambassadors go by and give folks information rather than strictly enforcing things right off the bat went a long way. But I had a retired fellow. They shared a lot of the same space as the lifeguards, and the lifeguards, of course, are in bathing suits. Some of his interactions with the young lady weren't good. So we had a process there to go through an investigation. We followed that process. And I terminated that individual because we followed that process and it did not align with our operations.
Yeah, so, yeah, I know.
Thanks for coming, nice to meet you.
You as well.
I think all small towns struggle with their economy, trying to keep businesses going. With what you know about us so far, what would be your approach to economic development? And as far as we are right now, what would your suggestions be to improve it?
And in terms of economic development, would you say attracting and retaining businesses in town?
Yep.
So I think it would be looking at your busy section of town. Where is your destination? Where would you like to have that destination be? And that's what brings in better businesses and establishes businesses if they become part of that destination. Manchester is situated and aligned with the coast, with the ocean. So how do we utilize that to our advantage? You have a great, busy, small, bustling downtown here. It's beautiful. The 20-mile-an-hour speed limits are great for your pedestrians, walkers, runners, bicyclists. And even down in through town, all of the different crosswalks, it's safe. But how can you enhance that even more to where you encourage folks to come in and spend not only an evening, but an afternoon into the evening? In Bethany Beach, we did that in such a way where we incorporated a trolley service. And the trolley service wasn't necessarily regional public transportation. It was for our residents to get to the 1.5 miles of beach we had that had about 500,000 people packed in there like sardines and paying $3 an hour to park. So we wanted to make sure that our residents can still get to those natural amenities of the beach. That's why they bought in Bethany. So the trolley service, we charged 25 cents a ride. And we made that just for residents. And it would bring them down to the downtown because you had a busy breakfast time. You had a French fry and hot dog time at lunch with some of the mainstays there. And then you had a very specific time between 5:30 and 8 o'clock of ice cream. And folks love to come downtown and do ice cream. And the ice cream businesses did very well, mainly because they were a destination. That's where those folks wanted to be to. So I think by looking at your downtown and aligning the different traits that you have in that area and opportunities, what kind of businesses can you attract? And then how can the town support the establishment of those businesses and allow them to generate revenues? There are different things such as, I know you do some smaller musical events and whatnot here. Can we expand on that some? Can we fund that through having businesses buy into a list of businesses to visit during those different events and times where they can advertise for different things of that nature? But making it an event either in the spring, summer, or fall months I think ice fishing doesn't really happen too well on a tidal waterway, you know, so
Yeah, it used to freeze there, but not anymore.
but really using the ocean to the advantage there and seeing how we can attract businesses and establish them.
Was the trolley self-sustaining?
No, that had a $100,000 budget. We transported in 4 months between 40 and 50,000 people a year, though. So it was very busy.
Yeah.
But the revenue in parking for the town was a $2 million endeavor, and we generated a lot of revenue on that. So it kept property taxes relatively low. It supplemented that. But our residents had a hard time getting to the beach. So we were able to use more of that revenue, increase some of the parking fees in order to pay for the trolley, make sure that residents could get.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to go back to leadership topics. Here's a fairly targeted question. From your experience and observation, what do you think is the most important or critical characteristic in an effective town administrator?
Honest. I think that would be first and foremost, being honest. Being honest with the governing body and being honest with staff. Next would be the collaborative piece, collaboration, and being able to facilitate the needs of your departments that are at the forefront of operations of the town. Making sure that they are aware that they can communicate to me, and making sure that I am communicating to you as the governing body for your expectations and needs to know what's going on in town and how to make the best decisions possible. But that collaboration piece also brings together everyone within the decision-making process. I would expect you to ask me, did your department head okay this? Have you ran that by them? Did Chief Fitzgerald say that this was a good idea? And I'd like to be ahead of that and have that collaboration already in place, and have that before you to make that decision. So as a town administrator, being honest, being inclusive and collaborative, and being a facilitator, those are 3 main traits there.
There's not a follow-up question, but a second question is, have you ever been involved in setting up regional or shared services to create efficiencies or cost savings? And if you have, I mean, we're exploring that now, but if you have, what are they and how'd that work out?
Certainly. When I came on board in Atkinson, they had a regional ambulance service already in place. It was a great deal. It was $1 a year. And this was made up of 6 different towns. Each town paid $1. We housed the ambulance at our firehouse, and a neighboring town housed the other ambulance. 1 or 2 of the towns ended up dropping off from that. By them dropping off, that increased the cost for everyone else. And others were looking to pull out too. So in order to maintain that collaboration, we facilitated the other towns coming in, and we did our due diligence in putting out RFPs for regional ambulance services to stay in place with different breakdowns of service, 1 ambulance, 2 ambulances, 1.5 ambulances, where they could be located. And we were able to keep together 5 of the 6 towns at a relatively low cost, because it wasn't exactly what the board wanted to do, go into the business of ambulance. The next year, though, we did have another town drop off, and at that point in time, we had to properly communicate what's the cost benefit of maintaining a contract service for ambulance at a higher price or running it in-house. So we have just transitioned into running it in-house, much like the town of Manchester, where we have 3 fire EMS staff at the firehouse 24/7. We run our own ambulance. But we were able to facilitate that regional approach to that. The next part of that is our dispatch service and doing, having a contract with a neighboring town in dispatch, but then restructuring that contract to invite one more town into that, to where the town running the dispatch service could still accommodate our needs, their needs, and another town, but saving our town extra costs. Those were 2 examples primarily within our first responder and public safety group.
Okay, thank you.
And you've said collaboration a few times. What, how do you handle conflict, particularly a conflict between you and the select board? Have you run into a case where that happened, and can you explain that?
Certainly, I don't always agree with decisions that are made, and I'll give my recommendation, and the board hasn't always accepted that. However, it is a decision that is made, and no matter what, I'm there to support that decision and move it forward. So I have thick skin. I let it roll off the shoulders. But if that is the bidding that the elected body of the town, who are the citizens of the town and the representative of the citizens of the town, want to happen and see that as the best interest of their town, I will support that and make sure that that's communicated thoroughly to all departments.
Can you give a specific example? Has that ever happened to you?
Yes. We had a instance where our fire department wanted to, they developed a pay matrix for their department. I came to find out that they had taken that from the police department, line for line, number by number, and we're trying to align that. And I had recommended not accepting that at that time. Let's rework it and structure that. The board wanted to thoroughly support the firemen and accepted their proposal and brought that on board. That did create a couple ripples there with our different first responders groups, but I was the one who facilitated that and smoothed that over to make sure that it was carried out correctly.
Let's talk finance again. We talked a little bit around your overall approach to the finance process, the municipal finance process. Can you dig into some experiences around financial forecasting? So in the corporate world, we call that FP&A, right?
Mm-hmm.
Financial planning and analysis. What experience do you have with that specifically? And, again, how do you approach that forecasting?
Certainly. In my previous position down south in Delaware, our finance director was probably the smartest person I had ever worked with before. And in terms of spreadsheets, she was a wizard. So the forecasting she would do there and sitting with her and working through that was an eye-opener and a great learning experience to see how that was done. But it was structured between 5-year and 10-year depreciation all the way to replacement needs and how to incorporate that. So I think looking forward within a certain kind of structure, setting goals of time limits, making sure that department heads are doing the same, specifically in terms of the different pieces of equipment they're using in what types of environment. Of course, we deal with a lot of road salt. Here, you're dealing with both road salt, air salt, salt water. It erodes things at a quicker pace, and being aware of that, how to forecast for that. Being out in front of that in terms of developing a budget and having one passed, I think is a proactive approach to proposing budgets in a positive manner. And with that is, does it align with the master plan? Does it align with the capital improvement program? Those are two big asks that I would have all the time to department heads.
Could you elaborate on a specific experience? Let's talk, you mentioned capital projects. Can you relate an experience where you have had to develop a strategy around a capital project and then, finance it and get it implemented, the whole soup to nuts?
Mm-hmm. Our current ambulance transition we just did, that's a big expense to get off the ground. And that's purchasing a new ambulance, that's hiring more full-time staff. That is, we have a combination department, but we also integrated per diem folks as well. And that in and of itself can be expensive. So there's a mechanism where you create a revolving fund for ambulance services. So on a warrant article, hand in hand with all of the others on those major expenses, was developing a revenue fund. And the revenue that we receive from ambulances would be X, and we would put that towards Y. That would cover this amount of the costs, and it would be spent by this way. But to make it even more cleaner, we had to develop a way to track expenses that were particular to ambulance service. So I worked with our fire chief on that to make sure that we had that laid out specifically. We have a structure of when we bring that to the board, for the board to discuss those revenue expenses to transfer from the revolving fund to our operating budget, and what they would need in order to make that decision. So it's that went hand in hand with that whole planning and process development, and then also pitched to the legislative body, and it passed overwhelmingly. And so far, so good. It's working well. We hired our fire chief a few years ago passed unexpectedly, but the new chief that we brought in, we knew what we were up against in terms of EMS services. So we specifically hired an individual who is a paramedic, and he was able to also onboard more paramedics for our service and enhance that service. So they've been doing very well. They know the business. They've transitioned to that very easily. And I did a whole crash course in EMS that I never knew I would know so much about, but it's been quite an experience.
Quick follow-up. So is Atkinson still looking at a new police station?
Correct.
Where are you on that?
So when I was first hired, my police chief came to me in my orientation with him and said, we have great conceptual plans for a police station. Let's push this forward. We need a police station. How long have you guys had these plans? Since 2019. It was developed in 2017, hit 2019 with a price tag of $6 million. That was a little bit of a sticker shock for folks. It never made it to the ballot, never got fully developed. So we formed a police station steering committee that came together to mainly promote the plan, put the plan together, dust it off, bring it back up. And lo and behold, it became the largest project that the town had ever seen at $9.4 million. And that's a conservative high number. It wasn't going to cost that much, but that was the end of it. And our approach was, we would propose a project to the voters that is the best of the best. We wouldn't do anything less, at least initially. That project did fail. We had open houses for that project. I would go to the open houses with the chief and the steering committee. We would open the doors to the current PD and have folks tour the building built in 1824 and see the needs of a new station. But since it failed, we needed a 2/3 vote for it to pass. It did not pass. The big question came, well, how do we get to a yes? So we developed a survey that went out to residents. We promoted that. We really promoted that one and got a great feedback of 1,000 of our 4,000 voters in town. The participate in that. And that gives us a good directional line on, you got to have the price down. They gave us a price that the majority wanted to go with. And then we're currently looking at the location. And we're going through that process. Well, I align with the location that was proposed. You had a lot of folks that voiced their opinion that they'd like to look at other places, and they might have better ideas. So we're facilitating that and making sure that, if folks have good ideas, we hear them, and if it's a really good one, we go after that in order to get a yes and have that station built.
Bouncing back to personnel management. Ping pong ball. This is a small town. It's very tight knit. Add that social media aspect to it. If you, again, we're not sure it's substantiated, but if you were to hear rumors of bullying going on, these are departments that you supervise, what's your first step? How do you handle that?
Bullying on the social media platform?
Well, it can be anything. It could be verbal, it could be social media, it could be in person. I mean, there's so many different ways of HR issues here.
Right.
All right. How do you handle an HR where it could blow up and it could be a problem here? So how do you nip that in the bud? What do you do?
I like to have consistency with those different approaches, but at the same time, you need to know your audience and who you're dealing with. The accusation, how big or small it is, does that not follow the town policy that might be in place? Is there a policy that should be developed around something like that? But taking all of those into account and staying consistent, it is bringing that to the department heads' knowledge first and foremost in a specific way. And that would be first having a discussion, but I would document that discussion to show that we had a discussion revolving around that. Also being sensitive to who the accuser is and what the fashion of that was all about. If that's in terms of social media, again, it would go back to pointing to policies and were they following the policy? Was it a professional form of professional conduct or not? What was the message? Were they using a town alias or was it their personal? Lots of different questions to get into. But I don't take bullying lightly, and I'd want to get to the bottom of that. Of course, there's two sides to every story, so you'd want to hear both sides of that. So it's asking those questions, keeping the audience in mind about who you're talking with, documenting it, and making sure we're following a standard procedure there.
There's a fine line between freedom of speech. Okay,
Absolutely.
and so that's.
So, I know you talked a little bit about sea level rise and you're a little bit, but can you elaborate on that? And can you tell us about any experience you have with fortifying existing roadways and structures against that?
Certainly. It was a pleasant find of the town's coastal resiliency plan and the different things that you've gone through to itemize and mark out. And I think that putting in your two tidal gauges is essential to all of that, seeing exactly how the tide affects the internal portion of the town. In Bethany Beach, if you go to the Town of Bethany Beach's website, at the very top, there's a few icons that I developed, and they're still in place today. One of which, well, a couple of them are real-time gauges, if you will. One is for tracking our trolley, so folks can click on that, and it's an application. They can, in real time, track where the trolley is so they can get out to the stop really quick and not have to wait in the sun for it. The other is the tidal gauge that we put in. In Bethany, you've got a man-made loop canal that was dug for a steamboat to come down from Rehoboth by water and drop off missionaries into Bethany Beach back in the early 1900s. Bethany Beach is at sea level. So in terms of stormwater drainage, if it rains and the tide's up, your rain has nowhere to go. And being able to track coastal storms, where the tide is, how that's going to affect individuals' properties, specifically with rain or sunny day flooding, is something we wanted to make sure that our citizens could access. So I implemented a tidal gauge on that loop canal, and we linked that to a GIS application, a LiDAR application that shows at this level, this area of town is going to be flooded. That aligns a lot with what you had done on the coastal resiliency plan here, where they showed, what's going to be impacted after 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, these portions of town. And much like Bethany, you've got a choke point here with your harbor and where that comes in your low-lying areas and your different roadways that can be impacted. So with the plan that I implemented in Bethany, we're able to carry that a little further and dig into how do you combat that and make sure that roadways are passable, businesses can stay open, folks can walk down and their homes aren't going to be, or they know if their homes are going to be impacted by this. One of the main things we came to find was the best solution was to develop and implement a bladder dam system at the mouth of the Loop Canal. And it's some of the same aspects laid out in your resiliency plan about raising the railway or Ocean Road, I think it was. Beach Road? Ocean Street. And possibly putting a tidal gate in there to kind of fortify your area downtown here and the different facilities and infrastructures if possible. But that was one thing that we had leaned on heavily. With the increase in sea level, a lot of our coastal marshes were also being eaten away. While they're eroding, they're filling in a navigable waterway of the Loop Canal that was utilized by residents. So we also proposed a plan, and I had left when we were in a grant process for this, of dredging the waterway and using the spoils, pumping those to the peripheral of the salt marshes with a low-profile sill, and using those spoils to actually recreate the marsh and build those up some. So those different aspects of that, I think, is experience that I have that I'd be able to bring to the town of Manchester and understanding those things. On my phone, I've got an app for tracking hurricanes and great white sharks in the area that I look at all the time. And when we had the small earthquake off the coast here, my first instinct is coast and tsunami. How is that going to be impacted? That's where my mind is. Again, I've lived on the coast my whole life, and it's that trait of your and location of your town is very intriguing to me. Draws me here, and I feel like I would do very well within the coastal aspect here. And things outside of the box about coastal resiliency. How can we fortify these things? Hands-on, we built many different stone revetments, marsh creation. I've done both mechanical and hydraulic dredging. So I know all of the aspects of that industry, what it takes, how you can never overbuild around the ocean. Water is the most powerful thing there is on this planet.
What's been your success securing grants for that kind of work?
In Bethany Beach, we were working with the Department of Environment and a FEMA program regarding the bladder dam. Army Corps of Engineers, we got funding. It was approximately $85,000 to do that initial study. Much like your coastal resiliency plan here is, what is the problem? What are the best options for that? And then pinpointing that one best option to move forward with. Other than that, coming here to Atkinson, I haven't had to deal too much with that kind of funding. But I have secured funding when some current projects come underway. It will be close to $2 million within 3 years. And those involve water line extension for PFAS remediation. That's a brownfields project that we're working with the Department of Environment, the EPA, and University of Connecticut on assessing one of our larger parcels for reutilizing that for different purposes or possibly selling it. To Homeland Security grant that we were able to update our hazard mitigation and emergency operations plans with ADA compliant trail hand in hand with our very active conservation group, and a housing needs assessment put in place by the Housing Authority of New Hampshire.
If I may follow up on that slightly, the other side of grants is permits.
Right.
Some of what you talked about doing at Bethany Beach sent shivers up my back.
Yes.
Is there a different regulatory organization in Delaware? Moving a foot of mud out of the town requires 2 years worth of permitting, basically.
Absolutely. The work itself is quite easy. It's the permitting and staging of that event that takes the most planning and effort to do. Same regulatory agencies, though. You have Massachusetts Department of Environment that would be closely on that. They would probably be the first and foremost. You're going to have Army Corps of Engineers. You're going to have fisheries involved with that. And I'm sure there's going to be one or two others possibly as well. Geological survey possibly. And they're going to want to take a look at those soils. Are they native to the area that you want to dispose of them? Are they contaminated at all? Normally, if you have in your harbor here that it silts in, it came from somewhere close by. So it's newer.
Our experience is that they want us to dump it out to sea. We may have done some pumping to create some of our current parks, but it was 150 years ago.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And to that point as well, another piece in Delaware that I work closely with was our dune replenishment. And you have offshore sand shoals. They would have to do the same thing, analyze that material and make sure it was clean enough to be used on beaches for beachgoers. And we had a plan in place for every 3 years, but after a few nor'easters, you lose your beach. If you lose your beach, you use your tourism revenue. So our pitch was unifying our regional towns together, lobbying the state to help with that bill quickly because the coastal tourism industry is one of the main industries for the whole state. And without that, your revenue source is going to be way down. So being able to jump on that project quicker than every 3 years, $10 million project, and have our dunes and beaches put back in place, we made that work. That pitch was successful. But that was something where they've been doing it for so long, and it's consecutive. They know the type of material. They know where to go to find it. It was an easier permitting process to have that through. Plus, it was a state project. So I think having those different entities on board with that and making sure that we're aware of what goes into that permitting process and how to get them the information that they need in what fashion the best way possible helps tremendously in that process.
Thank you.
Question about the schools. You have a regional school system. And I'm interested in hearing what your role has been in dealing with the school system from a budgeting perspective. I don't know what percentage of the budget the school system is and how much influence you and your team have in fashioning that.
Absolutely. That portion of the budget, much like Manchester, is the majority of the budget. We have a $28 million budget, while Manchester has $42 million. The town's apportionment to the schools on that is approximately $17 million, which is close to Manchester's as well. And the overall school budget is 90 million compared to the 30 million, 32 million for your Manchester Essex Regional District. But it's, 4 towns, 2 towns, it's very comparable. We've been successful in collaborating with our school representatives and including them in our board meetings and budget discussions, mainly so the board knows what's being proposed on the school side and they can communicate that back to residents. Most recently, we had a proposed $25 million 4-year lease to improve the facilities of all the schools in the district. We got that to pass on the first try. And that's being able to promote exactly how that impacts each school area in each town. And that went through. Last year, the school gave back $16 million of unspent funds. That didn't go over too well with residents because the year before their taxes had gone up so much because the budget had gone up so much. So this year, we brought back in the representatives that we closely work with and have those discussions between our governing body and the school representatives. We invited the superintendent in, their finance director on these discussions. Where's your budget going to be at now? These are our concerns. And they had heard it. We had $16 million of unspent money and we charged you guys for it last year. So how can we get by that?
We had that group.
Yeah. Hold on.
School positions are hard to fill in many cases. And I know they're being optimistic on that one. We need the money so we can fill these positions. We need to fill these positions for educational and developmental purposes. But the hard question is, how long have these been open? Is there a way to scale that back? Can we have positions work together or intertwine to wear some more hats, even though the school system is very, very busy and people are stressed out as it is? But asking those questions, getting a little bit more creative. This year, they did bring back a budget that was $3 million less than the previous year's budget. On the floor, though, at deliberative session, SB2 town, the legislative body brought that down another $7 million. And it was a very close contested race, but the lower amount did pass.
Can I ask just one question, which is
Oh, certainly.
relevant to everything? You say lease. Do you own the buildings?
Yes.
What's the, so what was the lease improvements? What was that?
I think a lease was the term used for actual borrowing of the money at a possibly higher interest rate, but at a shorter term. So the total out of pocket is much less than a bond if you did a 20-year bond. And it was an option they chose to do because spread out over time, or spread between 4 towns, 25 million spread over 4 years wasn't as hard of a hit to everybody to have that one wiped off the slate sooner. I hope that answers it.
I don't know, it brings to mind a concept I had years ago about why we even own the buildings. Sell the buildings, put the money in our pocket and just pay them. But that's another story for another time. Why do we need the buildings?
Ask your other question.
Okay, I'm going to ask a quick question. No, I'm going to ask the final question and be a good person. If appointed, what would you hope to say your accomplishments were? And it says 1 year from now, and I'd like to say 1 year and 5 years.
Absolutely. If I was honored to receive this position, a 1 year, at the end of 1 year, what you'd see would be a good relationship between ourselves as well as myself and staff, yourselves and staff. I think a very cohesive relationship there with open communication. On top of that would contribute towards would be checking off some of those planning objectives off, having better communication, hopefully, with the school if that's needed, but reaching some of the goals and expectations that you laid out for myself. in terms of our employees, employee retainment, not having large turnover. I believe I bring something into an organization, a trait that of a leader that people like to work with and work for, creating a great work environment and empowering folks in order to reach their goals and objectives, but aligning with the expectations of this board. So I think seeing those hard results after 1 year should be expected and is something that I would look forward to. After 1 month, it would be myself being fully in tune with your policies and procedures, your expectations, practices, and any outstanding legal budgetary items that are hanging out there. Just to make sure that I am fully aware of that, and if you have any questions about that, I'd be able to answer those questions confidently.
Right.
Good.
We're out of time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So second candidate, Tony Barletta. Please come on in.
Hello, hello.
Okay.
How are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. How you doing?
I'm trying to.
Pleasure to meet you.
I can't do a lot of
Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you too.
Good to meet you,
Nice to
Tony.
meet you.
Good.
Thank you for your interest in Manchester by the Sea.
Thank you.
Congratulations on being a finalist.
Thank you.
Please take a few minutes and tell us about your history, your interest in the position, how it fits with your career path, and what you find attractive to you about Manchester by the Sea.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me tonight, and thank you to John and his team and to the screening committee. The process has been excellent at this point. My wife and I live in Beverly. We have 2 small children, a 6 and 4-year-old. I grew up in Nahat, a small coastal community. Went to Nahat Elementary School, then Swampscott High School, then Endicott College in Beverly. After that, I went to worked in Boston at the State House. While working at the State House, I went to UMass Boston at night for my master's in public affairs, public administration, and then went on to the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and then Department of Energy Resources. And about 7 years ago, my hometown was looking for a town administrator. And when I worked for the Department of Energy Resources, I worked closely with the Green Communities program, and that's what really, I was bit by the municipal government bug at that point. And then Nahat was looking for a town administrator, so I really wanted to get involved, and been there for about 7 years now. I think that in my job, there's a lot of opportunity to move on from a community. I've seen many different postings for town administrator jobs over the last couple of years, and not one spoke to me as much as Manchester by the Sea. I think most of that is because of my upbringing, my roots, my coastal community, small town type environment that I'm so familiar with. Being the proximity to my home, my kids go to Brookwood in the summertime. We oftentimes come up here in the summer to visit the businesses or just walk around, things like that. So Manchester really spoke to me because of all those things, and I felt I was ready to advance my career because of where I was in Nahat, or where I am in Nahat. Excuse me. We've accomplished a lot of big things. A lot of priorities have been. A lot of those things on the list have been checked off, or the ball's rolling in a significant way. That I feel like Nahat is in a place. I felt like myself was ready to move on to the next step, and I felt comfortable with how I would be if appointed. Where I would be leaving the town of Nahat. I wouldn't feel right about leaving the community in chaos, in other words. But I also see, I I've heard so many good things about your team. I've obviously been doing my homework. I've been watching a lot of the meetings. You guys have such a talented group of volunteers, and your staff is excellent. I could have spent another hour in there with them. So it just seems like such a good fit for my upbringing, my professional experience, the relationships that I've established at the state level, with the local delegation, even at the federal level. And I think I could really hit the ground running here.
Okay, if you were interviewing candidates for town administrator, what's the first important question you'd ask?
Management style.
So talk to us a little bit about your management style.
Management style is, and I use that as a broad term. It's not just management style as far as how do you manage your employees, but also how do you manage all the complexity of different things that come across your table in any given day. As I think if I was a select board member, I would want to be looking for a candidate that I can trust, that I know, you're all part-time, you're volunteers. I'm representing you as the town administrator, and you want to be confident that no matter what comes up, any given moment, whether it's a public safety emergency, or if it's a controversial topic in the town, if it's planning for the future, you want to know that your town administrator has a good handle on that and is going to be informative to you, is going to be able to come to you with a diagnosis of those problems, a list of alternative solutions, a recommendation, and know that that town administrator is coming to you with your perspectives in mind, So it's broader than just managing the employees, but it's managing all the number of things that a town administrator is responsible for. In terms of managing your employees, as I was talking with your team in there, I think your management style has to be reflective of the culture that you want to build and you want to keep for the town. In a small town, it's very important. Everybody knows everybody, and a lot of times they are interacting with the staff, whether it's here in the town hall or DPW or police, fire, library, school, whatever you want to, whatever their interactions are, and you want to make sure that they have an enjoyable experience when they're working with those employees. That's only going to work if the culture of the team, of the staff, that starts from the top down, is built on collaboration and trust. Establishing those relationships is really important. So I would say if I was looking for generally any board of selectmen, that would be my first thing. In Manchester by the Sea, I think, and this might be a little biased towards myself, but I think having that coastal community experience is going to provide a lot of value. Understanding, permitting, planning, grant applications related to coastal projects, it's very complex. There's a lot of different details involved in that. And having that experience, I think, would provide a lot of value to your town.
You mentioned that we're part-time and volunteers. You're half right. All right, so leadership certainly are pretty critical right now. I'd like you to describe, well, we've already covered that a little bit. Let me ask this one. What's your understanding of the challenges associated with this job and also the opportunities here in Manchester?
The question of what do you do as a town administrator is one of the hardest things to answer because the range of challenges is so wide. Essentially, and not to be to give a sports metaphor, but essentially you're the quarterback of the team. You have to plan appropriately. You have to educate the rest of the team on the goals and the strategy. Then you have to execute. And sometimes it's not a perfect form of process. Different challenges can pop up while you go through that. And most problems that you're dealing with are multi-layered. Whether it's who's in charge or, who should be informed and how do you collaborate amongst the different boards or staff. There's so many different elements to it. So your question is,
The challenges and opportunities here in Manchester
so
specifically.
in my research on Manchester, I know obviously you have a lot of capital challenges in front of you. You have some operational challenges with the school budget. You have succession planning issues and amongst the staff. I've watched or read the organizational audit and watched the meeting where it was presented to you. I found it interesting that the organizational audit didn't recommend more strongly the creation of a town charter. I thought that was something that you guys should be looking at. Not even beyond just establishing roles and responsibilities, a town charter can also help you establish a process for your budgeting process. On what dates you should be coming forward with your financial forecasting, your capital plan, your draft budget, when the school should be providing that budget. And laying that foundation really sets up success long-term so that things aren't coming up last minute. So those are some of the challenges that I think are going to be on the forefront in the next couple of years, but more specifically to those coastal infrastructure and public safety building, public DPW building, those things that you guys have talked a lot about. Is how do you plan for those? How do you continue with your financial policies or process that you've already put in place? The budget is, we're in a really good, I looked at the balance sheets, it's very healthy. I noticed stabilization has decreased a little bit over the last couple of years, some of the retained earnings as well. But your stabilization account is a little bit under 5%. PLS suggests that it be at 5, at minimum at 5%, but OPEB's on a great track as well. But those things are going to protect your bond rating, which is going to result in better interest rates when you go out to borrow, which is going to set you up for success on those larger capital projects. There are other financial solutions that the town could explore, like enterprise accounts or different funding sources, things like that, grant opportunities that help reduce operational expenses. So, it seems like you're in a very good spot to start from. So continuing a lot of those priorities and advancing them will help accomplish some of the challenges that are in front of Manchester.
Okay.
Let's talk a little more about finance, since you started down that path. So you've talked a little bit about the fact that charter might be helpful to us to put some, dates and structure around our budgeting process. Could you elaborate on your, what your responsibilities have been as a town administrator in Nahant's structuring of their budget? How do you work with the different committees? And also, just maybe start with, what is your fiscal philosophy?
So I think the 3 pillars of sound financial management are financial policies, fiscal forecasting, and capital planning. They're not the easiest things to accomplish in a short manner of time, but working towards those builds a foundation for everything else. In Nahant, by the nature of the size of Nahant, I'm heavily involved from A to Z in the financial process. So it starts with working directly with my finance director and accountant on the forecasting the revenues for the upcoming year. Then, separating those revenues into an operational bucket and a free cash bucket. Then looking at what are our our must-fund operational needs in the upcoming year. And looking at our, in the free cash side, what are our priorities as far as what we're gonna fund? What we've done since I've been there is focused on building up our stabilization accounts. When I got to Nahan, it only had about $125,000 in it. We're now up to 1.1 million. When I got to Nahan, it only had $3,000 in OPEB. It's up about 5,000% now. And on an annual basis, we're using free cash to pay down additional debt above our minimum owed in that debt schedule. So it's a process of using those revenues for the things that you have to fund the upcoming year. But oftentimes, as you start to, fill that bucket, you run out of funds. So then you have to, additionally, I'm sorry, I should step back for a second. Then it's getting requests from your department heads. So sending forms out, having them put their requests in on the operational and the capital side, meeting with them, understanding what they're looking for. Sometimes, some departments, you gotta do a little extra assistance and make sure they're not just doing a percentage increase based on the previous year. It's reminding them, last year that we built that up last year for that one-time thing. We're not gonna build off of that now. We gotta bring it back. So not necessarily a full-on zero-based budgeting approach, but as far as you can go with that. So then you're making the tough decisions about wants and needs. And if you can get to some of those wants, that's great. If you can't, then you have to find an alternative way to fund it or push it off to a following year. And then it's bringing it to the Board of Selectmen. Then I'm bringing it to the Finance Committee. I'm working directly with the CPC as well, going to their meetings, and then presenting all of that to the Finance Committee. And then I do a lot of public presentation leading up to town meeting. I'm usually the one speaking the most at town meeting. I do public forums and office hours for residents to have the opportunity to ask questions about what we might be taking on at that town meeting. And I try to do it in an unbiased way so that they feel comfortable that they're getting the information that they want to make a decision. Ultimately, they're the deciders of how we're going to spend our money and what policy changes we're going to make. In particular, this year, similar to what you guys are dealing with the school, we're experiencing a unexpectedly high amount of special education costs in tuition and transportation, plus insurance benefits. So we, instead of just, even though the school has autonomy on building their budget, instead of just telling them, we can't, you're requesting this much, but we can only do this. Instead of just giving them that number and saying, you figure it out, we provided the resources on our end with our staff to sit with the superintendent and the school committee chair to help them find ways to accomplish their goals without adding the burden to the general fund. So we looked at circuit breaker, we looked at some of the trends in their budget and how they've been spending money, where they could make some cuts. We looked at alternative funding sources. They have donation accounts. They have some schools have a 501(c) set up where that can be used to receive donations and use that for capital projects. They had a preschool fund that had built a large amount of money in it, but the staffing costs, the salaries were paid out of that account, but the nurse wasn't, the custodian wasn't, the benefits weren't. They were coming out of the town. So we said, how can we equitably, fairly share some of these costs of the preschool to the revenue that's being generated by those fees? So ultimately, we worked with them I actually went to school committee meetings to try to explain the challenges, that the bigger picture of the challenges that the town was having, and the solutions we were proposing for them to consider, so that they could still accomplish their goals without negatively affecting the other challenges that we're facing as a town.
Thank you.
I'm to my there's management, personnel management. What are the, let me read off the page here. What are the 3 most important qualities you seek when you're hiring a town employee, and especially in a senior position? We have a
Usually,
police chief going to be retiring soon, so there's,
well, I mean, I believe strongly in succession planning. I think if you can build from within, I think that's important. But if you don't have that opportunity, usually I'm curious as to what their experience is, how they work with employees, or, with their team, and how do they work with the public. I mean, those are the primary, I think, goals for me in hiring staff. Is I want to know that you're going to be able to work collaboratively and collectively with the employees that you work with, and you're going to be part of that culture that we're trying to build. And I want to know that you're going to know how to properly communicate with the residents while also managing your department. So communication and collaboration is a big part of that. But you're also reviewing what your experience is and kind of going through a similar process that we're going through here, asking a lot of the same questions.
the town itself, we're a small town. Probably a little smaller than Nahat. How big is Nahat anyway?
1 square mile.
Okay, so there you go.
We're bigger, Brian.
We're about 3,500 residents. I think
Okay,
you're
so-
about 55, right?
Yeah. I see, okay. Do you have a high school?
We don't. We actually,
Swampscott?
we have like an informal regional, where after 6th grade, we go to Swampscott High.
Okay.
But we actually have a contract with them based on per student basis of we pay them to send our kids there. So it's not a formal regional like you have with Essex. But we're also minimally manned in our police department, in our fire department, our DPW, our town hall staff. It's usually 2-person team per
Oh, this is gonna be
department.
joy for you then, huh?
I'm very, like I said, it's really what I know.
Yeah, I'm very happy, and I think that the community itself is very happy, especially our public safety. It's a community, policing community first.
Mm-hmm.
So my point is that one of the biggest problems we have, obviously, is they're all union. What is your experience with collective bargaining?
So again, nature of small town, I'm involved A to Z of that process. It starts with meeting with my accountant, my finance director, and understanding.
It's all the same person.
Same person. And we'll call her my finance director to simplify. Meeting with her to look at the financial forecast. Just like Manchester, mostly 90-something% funded by residential property tax.
Mhm.
So in one way, it's kind of simple to calculate that because as I talked about separating operating funds versus free cash funds, your most confident funding source is what you're going to use to pay for those salaries. And that's going to be mostly by real estate taxes, which is capped at 2.5% growth. So you can forecast out what you can afford in the upcoming year. So I've gone through the process twice now with DPW, clerical staff, fire department, and police department. And then I'm meeting with them and negotiating with them directly. It takes time. Again, you got to build. If you're going into that meeting with already an established level of trust and understanding. It makes it smoother. But presenting to them the fiscal challenges that we're faced with, while also understanding though, that especially in Nahant, and I think you guys deal with a lot of the same stuff, is when you're minimally manned and you lose a full-time firefighter or police officer, it hits the town for like $60,000 to $80,000 because now you gotta, if you don't have someone else that's fully trained and ready to go in, you have to backfill that with overtime and send someone to the academy to get them fully staffed. So it's a priority for us and it's a priority for the employee to retain talent. And it gets harder and harder, especially in today's world with after police reform and, every police department's looking for that fully trained employee that they can pull over to their community. So you have to balance the financial constraints of the town with doing as much as you possibly can to retain that talent because it actually does create a cost savings versus, lack of support and losing employees and then transition it's so impactful to your town. But it's I think it's just spending the time with them to kind of explain to them, this is what we have in front of us moving forward. And then it's, you try to look at maybe some of these contracts are built off of contracts from 10, 20 years ago. So, maybe making, put some concessions on their side of the table to try to update those contracts that are going to provide a benefit to the town, but also provide a benefit to them. And then, of course, after that, it's advocating for that negotiated contract with the selectmen and with the finance committee, and then ultimately town meeting, and really getting.
One other thing, and Greg will be the first to admit it, Greg has this tendency of holding on to everything. I think his words are get caught in the weeds. What are your feelings about delegating? And my feelings are you get good people and you trust them to do their job. Okay. And where do you fall on that? Do you want to get totally involved with every aspect of every department?
No, I again, it's kind of the nature of the small town that I have to be, or I have been in Nahant. But the goal there is to, you might be in the weeds in the beginning, and working with the staff to understand the problems that they're facing and the challenges they're facing, trying to maybe bring some of your experience and different ways to think about a problem. But the true goal there isn't to just solve that problem right there and then, here's your job, complete that, and then give it to me, and I'll move it to the next step. It's getting them to see the big picture and understand, how can we approach this? What's the end goal? So that when the next time it comes up, they're ready, they're trained. And that falls in line with succession training too, right? So the more you can help develop the staff to think about it from a department head perspective or a town administrator perspective or the select board's perspective, it's going to produce long-term success. So I'm definitely not a micromanager by desire. And I definitely try not to be and try to rely on my department heads. You have, like I said, you have such a great, talented group of department heads, as I can tell from just meeting with them for the last hour. I think the value that I bring as a candidate is that having been involved in a lot of like the weeds details, is that I can work with your team and know what they're talking about, understand the issues that they're facing, and bring some of the experience that I have, use some of the experience they have, and work together to maybe find the best solution for the town, to whatever it might be.
Sorry, Steph, your time.
All right, I'll forgive you. So, and especially in a small town, a lot of times topics can be controversial among residents or they can turn into controversy. What is your experience engaging and educating communities in difficult or controversial topics, and what was the outcome?
So usually, let me start by saying that most of the time, it's turned out that that controversy is sourced by confusion and misunderstanding. And, you know, in the beginning, you got to go through the hard time to kind of really figure out what's the source of it. And then by the end, it's like, man, if we had just had this conversation 6 months ago, we would have already progressed. So now we take you know, after going through that process, now we take a different approach right from the beginning. And it's really about being transparent and educating the residents on what the challenge is, or like, for instance, housing is a big one. There's a ton of confusion just because you have 40B, ADUs, 3A. They all have different things associated with them. You know, most of the time that controversial conversation, you can watch it happen and people are talking about a different requirement, you know? So getting out in front of it to really help explain what's in front of the town and the challenges that you're facing, and try to educate people so that they're part of the process, I think really helps solve some of that controversy. I probably gained the most experience in that when I worked at the Department of Energy Resources. I had no clue about energy policy and SRECs and solar and energy storage and things of that nature. And I had to go to the State House and basically push certain energy policy on behalf of the governor. So I had to sit with the experts, figure out, you know, the terminology, understand the policy, and then find a way to break that down into simple terms so that I could explain it to people who aren't doing it every day. I used that experience in my first year in Nahant when we had to go for a general override. I started in August of 18 and met in April of 19. I was pushing a small operational override to town meeting. Largely because of those issues I talked about with the lack, our bond rating was at risk of decreasing. And had never been a municipal town administrator, never been in municipal government before. I had to quickly learn financial policy. I spent a lot of time with Division of Local Services, had them do a study on our situation, figured out, working with our accountant and financial advisors, what those issues were. Complex stuff to learn in a short period of time. But then I had to figure out, how am I going to explain this to the residents? How am I going to get them to understand what we're dealing with? So, you know, talking about operational bucket, free cash. Free cash isn't free and it's not cash. It's like a Christmas bonus, right? Talking about bond rating like it's your personal credit score. Talking about stabilization like it's your savings account. You know, so I think that's a big part of it. As a town administrator, and in some ways the face of the community on your behalf, trying to understand or trying to figure out ways to educate the public on some of these really complex issues that are in front of us will help prevent a lot of that controversy and confusion.
What are some of the tools that you use to educate residents?
So a lot of public meetings, public forums, blogging or articles in the newspaper, going to community breakfasts, or like I mentioned, hosting public forums prior to town meeting. Use a lot of PowerPoints, use a lot of graphics, and I'm developing that stuff on my own. So I think it's the tool is really trying to involve yourself in opportunities where people are already gathered and paying attention. It's, residents don't always want to come to a town administrator forum on town meeting articles.
Right.
And what I really liked about when I was watching your process through MBTA, I thought your planning board did a really good job with utilizing videos. It's hard to get someone to click on a Facebook post link that brings you to a web page that has a ton of information. It's hard to get them to read that stuff. But I thought the videos were super informative and relatable. People were willing to watch, a quick 2-minute, 3-minute clip, and it gave good, valuable information. So you got to find that way to break it down and relate to the residents.
Thank you.
Starting again.
Yeah.
From your experience and observation, what do you think the most important characteristic of an effective town administrator is?
Again, really wide range. I think trust maybe would probably be the biggest one, I would say, which then branches out to a lot of different things. Trust is something that you have to earn. And you're going to earn that through multiple different ways, whether that's trust with the board, whether that's trust with the residents, trust with the employees. It's your management style. It's your ability to plan. It's your ability to organize. It's ability to execute, whatever strategy you're putting forward. Understanding perspective, understanding roles and responsibilities, knowing how to stay in your lane, but also sometimes, opening the door to step outside of your lane because it's the best for the town, to work with another board, so to speak. Knowing when to inform people so that they feel part of the process, or that they feel like we're all working together. But again, in a day, in the 15-minute increments, I'm going from an HR issue to a public communication preparation to dealing with a zoning issue and transition in the inspectional services department to dealing with rodenticides or coyote problems or planning a budget. So there's, then there's the random sensitive information type stuff, legal type stuff. We had, unfortunately, when we went through the COVID, when we went through the pandemic, we had one of the first COVID deaths in the state in Nahat. A year or so ago, we had the unfortunate situation where 3 residents passed away from carbon monoxide poisoning in their home. Those things come up, and you have to have a town administrator that understands how to deal with those things, and how are you gonna manage those issues like that. Can hit. Usually it's 3 o'clock on Friday. So I think it's just such a wide range of responsibilities, but establishing relationships and trust is the foundation of being successful, I think, in this job.
I'll put all of this in the adaptability, flexibility bucket, because you touched on a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
Another question. Have you ever been involved in setting up a regional or shared services program to create efficiencies or reduce costs?
So we've attempted. As you know, there's 2 partners in that dance. So you have to have willingness from your neighboring communities that you're trying to do work with. But we've explored regionalization in inspectional services. We've looked at regionalization with emergency management. We joined NEMLEC, just like your police department has, which is an incredible resource. We've looked at veteran services, a little bit with Council on Aging as well, but it doesn't, we found out quickly that wasn't going to work. The importance of that department and the programming really had to be localized and convenient. So we went in a different direction. But yeah, we've sat down with our partners in Lynn, Swampscott, Marblehead. But it seemed like every time, remember, I started in August of 18 and 2020 COVID hit. So that put such a delay on a lot of the things we were trying to accomplish for a year and a half, 2 years. Then by 2022, we're restarting a lot of those processes, and select boards change and the players change. So we weren't able to make as much progress as we wanted to. Inspectional services is probably one of the biggest ones that we're trying to make progress on. And then in the future, something that's down the road in the game plan is our town assessor is nearing or years away from retirement. So how are we going to deal with that? Is there a regional approach to assessing? So those are things that we've looked at. And then again, we have our school system is informally regional. I think there's a lot of benefits in regionalization approaches that can be provided to your community and the other. There's a lot of cost saving opportunities there. But like I said, there's both communities have to be in line with each other, and then you run, how is the agreement structured? Is there a joint committee? Who has the power? There's a lot of things that come into that discussion, and small towns can sometimes be a little sheltered from exploring it because they don't want to lose some of that local control. And that community might run their community a certain way and we run it our way, so there's challenges to it. There's also benefits. So we've explored a lot of them. Some of them we've been able to move forward. Some of them we kind of realized right out of the gate wasn't going to be a good option for us.
Thank you. Good.
Welcome.
I'm going to combine two questions here. And one of them is fairly straightforward, that you and the select board disagree on something, operational budget. And as a sort of a second part to that, suppose the select board is simply wrong. For example, the select board is asking to go into executive session, and it's not one of the 10 reasons for going into executive session. So how do you deal with disagreements with the Board of Select? I'm sure it's never come up. But.
Yeah, right. I've worked for a lot of different selectmen. We had 3 in the hunt. The 3 that appointed me in my first contract were not there when I got renewed under my next and third contract after that. A big issue in the town of Nahant is a somewhat controversial topic related to Northeastern University and a expansion that they were pursuing. When I first started, the select board was directing me to negotiate with Northeastern and find a way for them to scale back their development and try to get a pilot program put together and benefits for the town. And then, 3 or so years later, the next select board really wanted to protect the natural resource from development completely, and I was directed to no longer negotiate. So I've dealt with changeover and different perspectives and views. I hate to keep saying the word trust, but it does come, it is like a key piece of it. I think that generally speaking, my approach and my recommendation that I'm bringing to the select board is based on what's best for the town. Not for I get, outside of the select board, I have residents or planning board members or ZBA, any sort of different motives, I guess. And so I try to inform the select board regularly on what those different angles are and which way I think, things that you need to pay attention to, things that we need to evaluate further and try to put forward a recommendation that's best for the town. I've never dealt with the issue of going into executive session that isn't called for it under the statute, mostly because I spend a lot of time with new selectmen when they come in, select board here, selectmen and not. When they come in, I spend a lot of time with them right out of the gate on open meeting law training and getting them to understand what the rules are related to that, especially in the House with only 3 members. It's extremely important that we don't have any open meeting law violations. So right out of the gate, I try to kind of set that framework. But I think for the most part, I've worked really well with a number of different selectmen. Some have different ways of wanting to do the job. Some want to be informed on a daily basis. Some want to meet once a week. Some want to check in once a week. So I try to learn what their style is, try to figure out what they want out of me as a town administrator, and work really hard on that relationship. And I think it's important to come back to that basis of what's best for the town. I'm assuming that anyone running for the position of select board is doing so because they really care about Manchester. They really care about the
And we're all
town.
trying to get rich.
And, and if it's basing it on that, it's that, and if all your decisions, your discussions, your conversations are really rooted in understanding the short-term, mid-term, long-term goals and what's best for the town, you should be able to overcome any types of differences. And I think it's important for a select board to understand that sometimes priorities are going to be shifted and sometimes, we're going to move in this direction or move in that direction. But providing a unified front for the community, even if sometimes your individual priority may not be the top of the list, is good for the long-term development of the town. You need to establish trust with the residents that we're all working together collaboratively and we're doing the town's business appropriately, reflective of what they want to see out of us. So there's a million things going on below the surface, and I think it's my job, our job, to really show a calm, unified front, and that's going to provide residents trust and transparency in that effort and education. That's going to provide the residents trust that we're doing the right thing, that we're thinking on their behalf, we have the priorities correct.
I'm gonna just branch off. What was the 3A process in the hunt and how did it come out?
We don't have to comply until the end of this year. We're an adjacent small town.
Okay. What's going
But
on?
the process has been, it started off with when the law was passed and the first round of regulations were drafted and put out for public comment. There was a lot of work on my end with the planning board, with our land use folks, with the select board, with legal, putting together comments on those regulations to try to get changes that would help our community and the unique effect that it was having on us. And then meeting with our legislators at the state, and meeting with folks at EOHLC, and actually, through that effort, they created their second round of regulations, created new categories for smaller communities like us. So our original required amount of zoning went from, I want to say it was like 400 something units, it went down to 84 through that advocacy. So we've really, we were in the process of a housing production plan. Then ADUs hit the street and became law in February. So we focused really on the ADU issue, and then we're getting into, we introduced the MBTA topic through the HPP process. After we get through town meeting, we're launching into a public engagement process for a special town meeting at the end of the year to deal with 3A. And, you know, again, small town community, you guys understand, it's hard to get, especially in the summer, it's really hard to get people to pay attention to zoning discussions. But it was so confusing to, again, it was so confusing, people were just mixing up the terms of 40B and HPP and 3A, and so our from 2.5 years ago, our goal was, let's start with the HPP, which is going to help us understand what the town's housing needs are. It's going to introduce what the state is putting or requiring us through 40B and through ADUs and through 3A, and introduce it to the public. Then let's focus on the ADU zoning, and then let's get into 3A. It's definitely a controversial topic. It's, you know, there's the baseline controversy of the state shouldn't be telling our community how to zone our community. And
So it's just not us.
and in Nahat, you know, we have one bus that comes through town twice a day. And then the non-compliance is so intense of a penalty. It's like getting a jail sentence for speeding. You know, and we spent so much time this last round after the Milton case, and the state had to redo their regulatory process. We submitted additional comments, and we talked heavily about how they've added the MVP program as a grant program that you won't be eligible for if you don't comply. And we're pushing really hard that, you know, in an open town meeting form of government, we can do all the work, all the groundwork, all the educational, the leadership can be all on board, but at the end of the day, it's town meeting who makes the decision. And if it doesn't go, if it's not successful, to take away municipal vulnerability preparedness program from a 1 square mile island town, you know, that's like, it just doesn't, and it doesn't seem right.
Proportionate, yeah.
It doesn't seem proportionate. We're, you know, so that being said, the fact that MBTA 3A is in front of us is forcing us to look at our zoning, which hasn't been looked at in many years. So there are benefits to it too. But there are things that I'm a little nervous about because we don't have a lot of developable area, and because 3A doesn't have an affordability requirement established in it. The idea naturally is, why don't we rezone pre-existing non-conforming multifamily units to hit our zoning requirement? But in doing that, you're opening the door, even with restrictions of the same height, same story, the same number of units, you're given that the opportunity for that property to redevelop. And even though they're not forced to be below market rate rental today, they are by the nature of the structure that they're in. So there's this unintended consequence of potential displacement for residents who are in below market rate not deed restricted, not SHI type property, that if we don't take the extra time to then meet with those property owners and maybe negotiate a solution so that those people don't get displaced, and just go to town meeting with a solution of, hey, we'll just rezone this. It's already there. Nothing will change. You could end up with that unintended consequence. So it's more than just advocating for a reg and then understanding how it affects the town and then coming up with the solution. It's also taking that extra step of what's the true impact here and how do we not unintentionally displace residents. So we have a lot of work to do in that regard, but we're getting there.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I just ask, before I get into another finance question, I just want to follow up on, you had the conversation about Northeastern University, and one board wanted you to collaborate with them, I guess, and another board didn't. Did you make a recommendation to either select board? And so how did you, and it may be still in litigation, but how did you
It
kind of
is.
fall, from a communication standpoint, could you just follow through to the end on where it stands right now, how you communicated with both boards? Did you make a recommendation?
We had negotiated a decent package for the town as far as pilot and benefit. But the true issue was the design of the development, which we were still working with, getting feedback from the residents and working with the university to try to adjust their proposal. If it really kind of fell apart because of a number of different things, but we got that. We had a package, but there was kind of the involvement in negotiation kind of dwindled from the other party. And without getting some of those figured out, the public, still had a lot of concerns, rightfully so, about the impact it was going to have on this beautiful natural resources that's been accessible by the public for years and years. So it wasn't really, it broke down for a number of reasons. But now we're in active litigation now, so I can't speak too much
Okay.
about that process. But I will say that the communication that I have with the select board, again, it's rooted in what's the best for the town. Every step of the way, evaluating what's in front of us, what's the best strategy to protect the town.
So just a couple of quick finance questions, just as, briefly as you can. Talk about both ends of the stratosphere. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience with strategy for funding large capital projects and getting them implemented, okay? Small towns, small budgets, right? But on the flip side, from a service standpoint, can you describe a time when you had found a cost savings opportunity without reducing services, to a painful level, let's say?
Well, the Green Communities Program sticks out immediately on the second part of your question. We were able to get a couple of grants that invested in energy efficiency projects of about $400,000. It only cost the town about $40,000, and it resulted in $125,000 in savings on an annual basis. So reducing that operating expense allows to free up some of that general fund revenue for the other operational expenses that you are having trouble funding. So that's a great program. You guys are, I think I may have came, when I was working for DOER, I think I came here for an announcement of one of your competitive grants. So you guys have done a lot of work there too. Larger projects, infrastructure projects, it starts with sound engine or study work, bringing in the right professional to study what the issue is. For us, we had when I came in 2018, earlier that year, our sewer infrastructure, we pump to Lynn Water Sewer Treatment Plant. And our main under the Linway, outside of town, had broke 3 or 4 times. And we spent close to $2 million making repairs for a piece of pipe not bigger than this table. So it was clear that that was a major issue for us. So when I came in, now in Massachusetts, you're not required to procure engineering services, but for an issue like this, we wanted to do it so that we could really evaluate, who we were bringing in to deal with this problem. So we ended up selecting Wright Pierce, which I believe Manchester works with as well on some issues. And we started with a alternative analysis. And we worked hard with them about not only what are the different ways that we can solve this problem, but also what are the possible funding sources that we could utilize. So through that, we ended up getting SRF funding through DEP, which is really a low-interest, long-term grant loan program. And because we were hit with an administrative consent order when those breaks occurred, it actually helped us in the competitive nature of applying for the SRF program. So we tied in with that our main pump station in town and a lot of our phase 1 and phase 2 critical II issues with our sewer system. And then when those projects get completed, the debt schedule gets issued. So while DEP is really pushing us to advance a lot of those projects quickly, we're pushing back on them because ultimately it's going to have an impact on our debt schedule. So trying to kind of navigate that in the way that is best for the town. We also utilize debt shift. The state allows for large sewer capital projects like that, allows municipalities to utilize a debt shift. So we actually shift some of that debt to the real estate side. So we collect it on real estate, which is a kind of a unique approach because now that debt is being shared amongst the town based on evaluation of property versus in your enterprise account, it's based on the amount of use that you have. So we felt it was kind of a way to shift that burden so that the families in the small house weren't having to pay more towards that debt compared to, the 2-person large household. So we tried to kind of split the debt and shift it in a different way. So utilizing kind of a unique funding mechanism or a unique funding source mechanism to try to help us complete those projects. So we've completed that Linway project. We're going to complete our main pump station project in June. We've done phase 1 II sewer related work, lining our sewer lines. We're going into a water meter project. We have another force main in town that while we have it authorized under SRF, we're seeking community project funding through the federal grant program. So if we can get that, then we don't have to go through SRF, and that's a grant versus a loan, better for the community. And then of course on the coastal side, we got just this past year, we were awarded a $3.5 million hazard mitigation grant through FEMA, which is a 75 to 90% match. So we're going to be able to do a massive dune renourishment project. And there's a lot of tricky elements with that. Federal funding requires you meet the most strict procurement rules of federal or state standards. So we've already procured coastal engineering to satisfy that requirement. We went to town meeting about a year before we applied for that grant to ask for the authority to borrow $500,000 so that when we applied for the grant, we could say we already have funding appropriated or authorized, which made us more competitive in the process. Now we're going back to town meeting to cover the rest, now that the final grant amount has been awarded. So there's, hope that answers your question. There's a lot of different, every program, every project, every funding source, every contract. There's a lot of different tricky things that you have to be mindful of to move pieces around to, build that puzzle together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're at your hour, it's a little over an hour, so it's your, decision as to which you wish to
Sure.
do.
The last question is, if appointed, what would you hope to say were your accomplishments 1 year from now? And maybe a thought about 5 years from now.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly, for me, I've been in Nahat for 7 years. I'm not the type of town administrator that jumps from town to town. I really believe in the role that I have, and I think in order to truly be successful, a long-term relationship is key for that. So I hope it would be longer than a short term. In that first year, I think for me, it's what's really important is establishing the relationships with the staff, with you, with the other volunteers and elected officials, with the residents, learning the community and understanding what the short, mid, and long-term goals are for that. So those things are it's gonna take some time. Like I said, it takes time to earn trust. And so really being available, being present, being involved in a lot of the different things that are going on in the community to really establish those relationships would be, 6 months down the road. If I accomplish that, we're ready to move forward. And I think it's really important. I think culture is really, really important. And establishing that culture amongst the staff will automatically, instinctually reflect outward to the residents. So I hope if appointed, 6 months from now, I look back and say, okay, I know that I got a good relationship with people and we're heading in the right direction, got some goals laid out and priorities laid out. And that would be really the key for the first few months.
Thank you. Anyone else have?
I'm good, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
One more thing you'd like to say?
Yeah, I would be happy to, make myself available over the next weekend here if you want to have any follow-up conversation one-on-one. I'd encourage you, if you want to reach out to folks in Nahat to get a better feel for who I am. I think you'll hear good things. And I think that, like I said from the beginning, the value that I bring as a candidate is that I really feel that I can hit the ground running here with my experience of a small town and my upbringing of understanding how small coastal communities work and what drives them. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
It's a pleasure to meet you all. You know, you
Great to
have a
meet you.
great, I'm telling you, your staff is, I could have sat in that room for another couple of hours. They were great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And Chuck Dan, your third candidate for the evening.
Was it?
How you doing? Good to see you.
Hey, Chuck, how you doing?
Thank you.
Good to see you, Chuck.
John.
Been a long time.
Yeah.
Long time no see.
Okay. Reading from my instruction, thank you for your interest in Manchester by the Sea, and congratulations on being here. Please take a few minutes to tell us about your history, your specific interest in this position, and how it fits into your career path.
All right, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It was a slam dunk easy decision, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys tonight. You know, a little bit about myself. My name is Chuck Dam. I'm the current DPW director here at Manchester by the Sea. I've worked with all of you in the past, so I'm excited for the opportunity to be considered for a town administrator. Actually, my first day in town was 7 years ago yesterday at annual town meeting, which was a very long night for someone that just started. But you know, when I got home, my wife was like, "What exactly are you doing now?" So it's been a good 7 years. I think we've had a very productive 7 years. But a little bit about me. Prior to being in Manchester, I spent 11 years as a consulting engineer on the private sector side. When I left that company, I was a project manager. So you know, I was responsible for communication, project communication, client service, technical excellence. You know, a lot of things I think have made me successful as a DPW director. You know, were things that I started on the private side. I also think that they would be a benefit to me if I were to assume the town administrator role. You know, when I left there, I was not really sure what I want to do for my career path. So you know, there's changing culture at my company. It was kind of like we were a small to medium company getting to be a medium to big company. And so there's a lot of different changes that were made, especially to the project management track, which is something that I saw myself doing for the rest of my career. And so I kind of took a pause. I decided to see what was going on in the public sector. I actually started in the city of Salem before I came to the town of Manchester. To be honest with you, when the position for DPW director first opened up, it was October in Salem, so I didn't really have a lot of time. And I told, somebody asked me if I had seen the job and was interested, and I said no, because I wasn't, I just moved careers. I've been in Salem 6 to 9 months, something like that, and I didn't really think it was appropriate for me to move, and I'd never been a DPW director before. But luck should have it, I guess, one way or another, 3 or 4 months later, the same person came up to me and said, "Hey, that job's still open in Manchester. I think you'd be a great fit." They had been doing work here. It was nobody at town hall. It was somebody else. And so I said, "Okay, I'll give you my resume," but I didn't really have high hopes for it, and I wasn't really expecting much. But I did come to town. I met with Greg. We discussed it. I met with it's actually a separate board, different board than you. So I've made it through one full turnover of the entire board. In the 7 years that I've been here, and so without having DPW director experience, I kind of had to rely on my core skills from my project management experience, and I think that served me well. And I think I've been successful as the DPW director. Of course, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of support from the select board as well as the community. But I think that's something that I think we've made good strides on. The reason I think town administrator is a obvious next step for me is there's no super senior DPW director. It's there's the DPW director, and then there's the town administrator, working directly for the select board. In my 7 years here, we've put together a lot of reports. We've done a lot of work, but I know that there's a lot of work left to do, and I think that my role as DPW director has led me to the conclusion that the best place for me to enact this work and to get it done is to be the town administrator, working directly on behalf of you all, as well as when there's additional board turnover, and to have that continuity at the town administrator level, as well as with the department heads and staff.
If you were interviewing candidates for town administrator, what would your first most important question be?
If I were interviewing for the
Yeah, if you were us,
Right.
what would you ask you?
So I guess there's a couple that come to mind. There's obvious ones about management style, communication style, style questions. To me, for this town, if I were you guys, I'd be asking, what do you see as the challenges and opportunities for the town? That would be my question. Would you let me answer it?
Okay, answer it.
So, like I said, I spend a lot of time, in town at this point, doing a lot of the studies. And when I look at challenges and opportunities, I'm thinking in the long term. The challenges that we're going to see with
climate change, sea level rise, intense storms. Those are long-term issues that, may or may not happen today or tomorrow. But I think a lot of the stuff that we do in the short term will impact how those things in the future impact the town. What I mean by that is, we did this coastal vulnerability action plan. We looked at, the inundation studies. We looked at modeling. We looked at these things. And there's, short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals associated with meeting that challenge. We've also done a number of other studies, most notably, I would say, the facility master plan, which in my mind is really a continuation of the town master plan. And the facility master plan talks about the police station that, may or may not get inundated, the next king tide we have, but also the fire station, which is vulnerable, as well as the wastewater treatment plant, which is vulnerable. So I think we're doing everything we can to maintain services and to, harden that infrastructure, but I think it's going to take a concerted effort and certainly a lot of capital and support from the community, the select board. And I think that I have the right knowledge and skill set to help us meet those challenges and accomplish those goals in the short term, medium term, setting us up for the long term.
Yeah, Chuck, thanks for coming and meeting with us tonight. Ann stole one of my questions.
Oh, that's right.
But we all know you, but how do you describe your leadership style? And because of your background, so unique, what kinds of unique skills do you bring to this that others might not?
Right. Thank you for the question. So when it comes to leadership, when I first started as DPW director, I think there was a little bit of a void in leadership. The previous DPW director, she was great, but she was contracted, so she didn't really have ties to the community. And she did a lot of studies, but I think the personnel issues were front and center when I took over. And so I spent a lot of time trying to gain the trust and confidence of my staff. Since I've taken over, I think we have, I've told Greg prior that morale is at an all-time high right now. We've had some turnover and retirements. We've had some turnover of people moving on to other things. And we've managed that and backfilled that with some good people. We've also allowed other people to step into division leaderships positions on the water side, wastewater side. And so I think I've facilitated those transitions. And I think so my leadership style is mostly to lead by example. People see you work hard and they respond to that in kind. When they know you're at a high level, knowing the ins and outs of what they do, they also want to respond in kind with a high level of performance. So I think that's my main goal as a leader, is to inspire that kind of high level of work ethic. And that's what I bring to the table. I also think it's important to empower your staff. I'm not a micromanager. I don't think I would try and do somebody else's job for them. We need them to pull their weight and do what they're capable of and what the job requires. And so it's giving them the tools to succeed in that job and supporting them.
What do you think the most important characteristic is of a town manager, administrator?
Well, in my opinion, we need strong communication. I think it has been strong communication with Greg. Obviously, he does his weekly update. He updates you guys, for your board meetings, and whenever there's some other crisis that pops up, I'm sure you guys are his first call. So I think communication is key. I think you need to have good communication with the public. I think you need to have good communication with the board, obviously, as well as boards and committees, and your department heads. So I think, my role as DPW director has lent itself to, by one way or another, your kind of forced communication. When you're digging up somebody's street, they're going to want to know about it. When there's detours, people want to know about it. And we try and strive to do our best in all those situations. But so I think communication at the town administrator level is key. Very, very important characteristic.
Good. Thank you.
Let's talk finance, Chuck. So you know, we've been exposed to you in the FinCom meetings on DPW budgets. You know, you have some of the largest budgets in the town, right? So, but could you talk to us a little bit about your fiscal philosophy? Start with the big picture. You know, what's your fiscal philosophy? And then, you know, can you give any examples to support that? And then kind of get into what do you expect your responsibilities would be as a town administrator in that financial process versus what you do today?
Thank you. Yeah, so as DPW director, I think I manage most of, or the biggest non-school line item, both operationally as well as capital. You know, for the big picture, you know, what I'd say is there's always something else that needs to be done, so we need to prioritize. Obviously, there's a limit to what we can, even if we, you know, have the best plan in the world, there's a limit to what we can execute on an annual basis anyway, as well as, you know, just not the financial, we just don't have that ability to, you know, tax people to that level, and nor would we want to. So I think you have to really think about it in terms of you know, what people need and the priorities, and then try and respond to as many of the wants as you possibly can. Obviously, the school impact is the biggest impact. I don't think there's much from a town administrator point of view that you can do, but I think that we certainly should be, you know, working directly with the school administration. Obviously, people want, and you know, I have 2 young kids that are entering elementary school, and we're looking at new schools in our town, and it's expensive. But you know, that's what people want, and we need to support that. So you know, I understand when we're asked at the town level to make up that difference. You know, when we're asked. I think looking at the smaller line items. What I've tried to do over the last few years, I will admit, when I first started, I did not have a great financial understanding of the town as DPW director. So stepping into that role with, you know, one of the largest budgets. But I work directly with Andrea on a daily basis, or a weekly basis. I still have, to this day, a weekly meeting in my calendar to meet with Andrea and talk about budget, because that's what we started when I started the job, and we've continued it. We don't necessarily have to meet every time, so it's a good thing in that respect. But you know, it's always good to check in on it. And so my approach over the last couple of years, now that I have a much better handle on our finances, has been to start with you know, the absolutely have to have in the budget. So you know, our salaries are collectively bargained. We need to make sure that that money's in the budget. We have prescribed rules for overtime and, you know, callbacks. We need to make sure that's in the budget. We're always going to have to pay an electric bill. We're always going to have chemical costs. So that's in the budget. But and then, you know, unfortunately, well, lots of times those things have been increasing, and lots of times over, you know, based on inflation, over kind of CPI 2.5%. So, you know, then we have to start looking at kind of the nice to haves, or the, you know, are you really going to do that this year, and take those out. I think I've taken the approach to start at zero base on some line items where we can. But again, we have contractual obligations, so you know, we need to meet those, even beyond salaries when it comes to things like rubbish collection. And so unfortunately, those are, you know, dialed in at over 3%, 3.5%, and that's when we have to look at the other line items. So to get to your question, as a town administrator, I think I need to look at those department. I think as my department head experience has kind of shown me the smaller line items and where, you know, potential savings are, or at least where we need to look. And I think I actually, to be perfectly honest, just talked to the department heads when we had the financial conversation. I said, it is fair for us, you know, as much as, you know, we have our priorities as leaders and, you know, department heads and things that we want to see done because we've been working so hard to get to them. It is fair for us to answer the questions, do you really need to do that? And I think that as town administrator, you have to ask the question of your staff and find out what the consequences would be if you had to take a budget item away, or, you know, lower it, and what that impact would be.
We have so many more lines than that.
Well, I want to make sure you have an opportunity. I can go into my next question if you'd like me
Not
to.
every line number.
Okay. Thanks.
Chuck, thank you for coming. This is, I'm in charge of personnel management. Okay. what are the, now you've hired, obviously, all right? What are the three most important qualities you seek when hiring a town employee? And what senior positions have you filled? How have those hires worked out?
So, couple of things on personnel, I would say, I had to assess when I first started what the shortfalls were within the department and where we needed to be dedicating our limited salary resources that were, established prior to me coming, but also as we look forward in the future and building a team that, we could count on and depend on. My first personnel move was to recategorize a position working directly for the DPW director and making Nate the town engineer. I think that was the best hire that this town has made since I've been here. I'm also very biased, but I'll admit it. Nate has filled that role. He's had a lot of success as the town engineer. He's added up quite a bit to our capabilities. What I was looking for in that position was somebody that I could rely on. So they need to be dependable. They need to have a track record of doing it. Certainly I knew Nate, so I knew the answers to these questions before I asked him. And before I asked him if he was interested in the position, I had targeted him. More recently, we hired a clerk of the works. I was very thankful that the FinCom and the select board approved that position. We hired a person with 30 years of experience in water and wastewater operations, which fills a lot of needs, but is also going to be critical for our ability to execute the upcoming capital improvements plans, even the ones that, forget the ones that may or may not happen in the future, the ones we have on the books right now. So I try and look for people, especially in these high-level positions, that I know or that have been referred to me by high-level people that I trust. And I want somebody that is reliable, first and foremost, with good work ethic. And then the technical skills, obviously for that position. If I'm hiring an engineer, I need somebody with engineering technical skills, but also see where they fit with the team. Obviously Nate was going to be in a leadership role. This other person is going to be with the water and wastewater people. So I think we've done really good at the DPW level. The other thing that I would say, on just personnel, is sometimes you have to look at reorg. So that's a way that we've been able to, like I said, improve morale by giving people different opportunities, recategorizing what they've already done. And it doesn't have to be budget positive; it can be budget neutral, and then it allows that person to grow into a bigger role, and eventually, hopefully, it has some sort of financial reward because people need to make a living. But that's something that we've been able to do that I think has been very successful.
Right, on the other, so you've been involved with collective bargaining. Tell me about that.
Right. So my approach to collective bargaining is that my current role, obviously we have the DPW union. We also have clerical union that we work with. I think you have to look at the market. What is the actual market? My role with Greg has led those negotiations, but we need to get to a starting point. We need to understand how that's going to impact, from the administrative side. You need to understand how that's going to impact your bottom line. So, if for some reason things get out of the 2.5% threshold, where are you going to make that corresponding cut? And I think the people on the other side of the table, the union, need to understand what that might mean. Certainly, the biggest pressure that I don't think anybody's had a good answer for is the insurance requirements, and there's the town match, there's the private the employee match, and it's very hard to make those numbers work. We've seen it firsthand this year with the school insurance, but also same story for the town, just not quite to that degree. So I think we need to look at what those benefit packages are, and hopefully we have good communication so we know where each other stands. And I think that's one of the aspects that I have that I would bring to that negotiation, is just kind of the reframing of conflict and trying to understand what people are looking for from their side of the table, but also what's in the interests of our side of the table. That's how I'd approach it.
So in dealing with the public, there's always conflicts that come up. Can you tell us how you work to resolve conflicts and disputes? And can you include an example of a time when you had a polarizing issue? How did you address the issue, and were you ultimately able to get anything accomplished?
Right. So I just touched on this a little bit with the reframing of conflict. So this is actually something in my old job as a project manager that we did a lot of training on, was reframing conflict and conflict resolution. And so I think we've certainly had our share of conflict in DPW, one thing or another. There's personnel conflicts, just differences of opinion slash not getting along with a certain person or entity. We've had our share of that. There's also structural, just difference of opinion where people just don't think we need to do that thing, and we're doing it anyway, and we're trying to get them to come to our side and understand. So I think the most important thing to do, especially when things get heated, is to diffuse the situation and to take a trip. We used to call it, honestly, I'm not making this up, go into the balcony and just kind of imagining things from the other person's point of view. And I would say that 99% of the time, even if you still don't agree with that person, you can find 1% or 10% of what they're saying and their criticism as being true, and you can offer that as something you can work through to kind of bridge that gap. It's happened very recently for me personally, and even though I disagree completely with the other side of the argument, I used it to understand where my shortcomings were and what I could do better, because there's always something that we can do better to get past it.
What is your experience in engaging and educating the community in difficult or controversial topics?
Right. So that's a good one. I think first and foremost, like I said, the communication is key. If you can get out ahead of things, people don't like to be surprised for sure. I like to offer all the information, be as transparent as possible. I think that's important, especially within the community. Obviously, we talk to boards and committees, select board especially, on a regular basis, but not everybody is going to those boards. Not everybody is, watching those meetings after the fact. So I try to make sure all of our reports and, upcoming work is on our website. That way, no matter what anybody says, I said, please just check the website, because it's probably there. One thing that I've been thinking about more recently is, there's a lot of reports. I'm sure you guys read all my reports, every word, but there's a lot of people that don't. It's a lot of tedious minutia and not necessarily easy to follow, especially if it's not your topic of expertise or interest. And so what I've been thinking is that, and I've talked to Tiffany about this, is do what I'm calling the DPW TLDR, too long didn't read, where we would literally, do a Zoom call, flip through a report on, recorded on Zoom, and, myself or whoever the subject matter expert is would discuss, kind of the high points and what people should take away from that report. I think that's, a good place to start. Stuff that I've been.
Great, thank you.
Back to me.
Yeah.
Question. Can you provide us with an example of an innovative idea that you brought forth, either here in Manchester or elsewhere, and that you've implemented in your career? And has it been something from which, if not from Manchester, is it something from which Manchester would benefit?
Right. Well, so I spent my public life here in Manchester.
I know.
So I think one of the things that we do on a capital basis that I think the town has benefited from is when we bid our large scale capital project. That's what I used to do on the private side when I was consulting. Was we have a base bid, we have we know we can get this amount of work done, and then we apply that to the next thing. So the example I would give right now is on Pleasant Street. There was the Pleasant Street that we had to get done. But then we also wanted to, hopefully leverage some of that mobilization and that economy of scale with additional water main work. So right now we're mobilizing to do Old Essex Road. We also had an ad alternate for Pleasant Street Extension. So in that sense, what we're doing is we're looking at, got to get it done. Then since you're here, you want to give us a better price to do, go this much further? So I think that's something that, we've done, and we've been successful, and we've been able to kind of make sure, and, this is important as well. We've heard from FinCom and yourselves that, they give us a certain amount of money, either spend it or give it back. This is a way that we can make sure that the allotted money is spent, within that year or 2-year timeframe, depending on the project. Another one that, I think looking forward and, talking about challenges and opportunities is we have a facility master plan. We've already started, as you guys all know, working on siting DPW at the School Street site. There has been some talk with the board, FinCom, conversations where could we also co-locate a public safety, so make it more of a public safety campus up there. And, certainly it'll be more expensive than a DPW, and certainly it'll be more expensive, than, probably the budget that we have. But using those same principles, could we mobilize a contractor to do site work? And the site work that they do to complete the DPW project is also setting us up for the site work's already been completed now for the public safety building, assuming that's a viable alternative. I think it's a very good opportunity, and I think it's something that we should be prepared to jump on if it presents itself. And then same thing as we get to the building trades. The foundation guy comes in, he's doing one foundation for potential DPW site, a couple outbuildings. What about this other one? What's the added cost? And we'll be able to see. Hopefully the idea is that we get some economy of scale. We reduce the mobilization charges, and we get that get that better price. And I think that's a way that we can hopefully leverage the finite budget to get the most amount of work done. Getting back to challenges and opportunities, I think this is an opportunity where whether I get the town administrator job or I continue on as DPW director, I think it's very important that we look at these opportunities and we hopefully make some headway on DPW to start. But if we get to a point where that work gets completed and we're value engineering, we're getting building materials at different rates, and we make some savings there, apply that savings to the hopefully public safety facility. And even if it doesn't become a public safety campus, maybe it's only a DPW, but then we do public safety. As all these things unfold and we make this progress, I think it's going to open up these opportunities where now we start looking at Pleasant Street site. I mean, you guys know just as well as I do, as everybody in this room, we have needs for housing, we have needs for open space, we have needs for cemeteries. Until we start making this progress, none of those things are going to make any headway. And so I think when I talk about opportunities, it's just getting to that next step, and then we can make the more critical decision with that much better information and hopefully at a much better price. And these are things I'm looking for every time we put out a bid, every time we start on these projects.
Just following that thread of opportunities and challenges, and I'm certainly aware when it comes to money, you're probably the biggest guy involved with the challenges that cost big money here. But whether many of these opportunities that you've mentioned really are all related to DPW, all of these opportunities. Are there other opportunities, and you're in town hall and you listen to the public as well, other opportunities that you see for furthering this town, if you're sitting in the town administrator's seat, that we should be taking advantage of?
Right. So, that first shoe to drop is DPW, according to the facility master plan. We've also looked at whether or not public safety would go at School Street or, whether it goes to. We've also kicked the tires on a couple other opportunities. Didn't work out for public safety. I'd be happy for, any of these projects to get done. I think the senior center going down at the Masons building is another opportunity where we could, we've already talked about co-locating other town offices, as well as a public restroom, which I know is also another thing. So again, anytime we start talking about these big capital projects, there's so many needs, we need to at least consider whether or not some other need can be met with them. I think as we build out the senior center, or there's a harbor master office or bathrooms at Masco Park, like, as these things develop, then where they vacate becomes the opportunity. So if we relocate, Board of Health and Parks and Rec to the new senior center or town office space, eventually we need to get, the planning department and Concom out of Seaside One, because Seaside One cannot be viable in the long term. So these are, again, another area where, it's not DPW, it's, just all of these things need to, have an overarching theme.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, compound question. Can you describe the overall relationship you envision for working with the select board? How do you communicate on different kinds of issues? And how do you define a successful relationship between the select board and the town administrator?
So I think the first answer for communication, is that the first question?
Yeah, it was large and small issues.
So I think what I try and do with everybody, but, with the select board, is to develop that relationship early. When these three, sorry, I didn't get to it with you guys, but when these three became select board members, even as DPW director, I immediately emailed, said congratulations, but let's talk, because there's a lot of town issues that, when you're running, you might not understand, from a town personnel level. And then, I'm happy to take people out to, get eyes on some of these issues. I've spent a lot of time thinking about all of the different capital needs and facility needs and roadway and vulnerabilities on beaches and streets. So I want to make sure that you guys are aware and see kind of the
Okay. I'm
things.
going to go off on a slight tangent here. There's some talk about bringing two disparate departments together, specifically making a department that would include seniors and recreation. Now how would you manage that, given that there are strong advocates for the seniors need senior stuff, and there are other advocates who say that sometimes the kids and the seniors can get along. How would you approach, the people involved, how would you approach trying to bring those ideas together?
So I think that first and foremost, I would want to talk to those department heads and understand, their situation and, what they see as the pluses and minuses, those, pros and cons in those situations. I think that, I would want to talk to you guys about what your thoughts are on that. Then hopefully be able to communicate those back to the department heads and say, well, what about this? Because I'm sure you guys have different thoughts than them, living it. So I think there's a benefit to having kind of the internal view and the external view. And then there's, they also answer to boards and committees, so we're going to have to get their boards and committees, Parks and Rec, as well as
Okay,
the Council on Aging.
I'm trying to imagine an org chart that has employees reporting to volunteer committees.
Well, I'm not saying that they report, I'm saying I would want to get their information, get their take on it. If tell them we're considering moving these two together, what is your thoughts? I'm sure they have strong opinions, so I think we would need them to have broader support at the select board level or at the town administrators level. I guess what I'm saying is I would want to do a lot more background onto what the positives and negatives associated with that would be. And then I think reasonable conversations about who would lead it. I mean, I think it would have to be a posted position, so maybe one of those current leaders in those roles, department heads in those roles, would say, I'm just not up for doing that, and I'm not willing to try. The other might say, I want the opportunity, and here's all the things I think that we can do for the community as that change. So, it's a process. You need to start with the background information, understand what people's needs and wants are, again, positives and negatives. See if there's any, budget implications, see if there's any, other situations that would have come out of that, there's some sort of code thing, or there's some sort of, just conflict of time, people need this facility and they need it there, it's just not gonna work, there might be some structural thing that just isn't gonna lend itself to that happening. So I'd be willing to take a look at all of those things and understand what people's thoughts are on it and make the best informed decision, or present the best informed decision to the board for them to decide.
Sorry, but we gotta talk money again. Let's see. So can you talk a little bit about your experience with financial forecasting? Not so much for a particular project, but just, if you were town administrator, how would you approach financial forecasting? And then how would you kind of how do you envision yourself overseeing or being involved in the whole town budgeting process, soup to nuts?
So I think that the best thing about coming into the potential for a TA position is that structurally we've already committed to a finance director, and I have a very good relationship with Andrea and Jen, and so I would strongly lean on them to make up any shortcomings I might have. But I am a very quick learner, and I am interested in obviously the town finances as the town administrator. In terms of forecasting, I think we have the tools within the OpenGov to kind of look at where we've been, what the trajectories are, and how we've forecast that forward. Certainly, there are some other things, on the horizon that are pluses and minuses. Frankly, we have CST coming online soon. We have the OPEB being retired. So that's those are big things. I know I've worked very closely with Greg already on the forecast for and how the capital ties into those larger items, but also other town debt that would be rolling off the books. So I think that that's all important, and that's all part of the equation. And then we need to look at services, and sure, there's one track where it's always level. Then there's probably another track where we're looking at things that could be cut or would need to be cut. And then there's again what happens if we get some really good outcomes, and we want to add certain things, whether it's the health and safety or human services becoming its own department. If that has additional programming needs, then can we fund it? So I think that those are all things that we would have to iterate on and think about. There's a blue sky scenario, there's a cloudy scenario, and you need to know everything in between.
So following up on that, because you mentioned services, can you describe a time when you found a cost savings opportunity without reducing services to a level where it hurt?
Yes, I can. So, like I said, in the capital world, or in our water and sewer world, there's the farm out the services, and then contractors, and then there's do it in-house services. And it's always a balance looking at those things of, we only have a certain number of capital items, we always have a limited operational budget. But anytime we can take something out of the capital and move it into the operational, it's a savings, typically. Certainly we're not qualified or have the personnel in-house to do these large $1 million scale projects. But when I first got to town, we were farming out every last hydrant, every last minimal water extension, and we are not doing that anymore. We can fix hydrants. We actually did do one extension out on Overledge Road. I guess I gotta brag a little bit. We did a 250 feet of water main that would have cost $250,000. We did it for $50,000 time and materials. And because it was kind of out of the way, there was no traffic, and we didn't need all the big heavy equipment that you see out on Pleasant Street and Forest Street. So that's an example of a big win that we didn't get credit for. Another one that, I'm gonna take credit for now is at the wastewater plant. We have a permit with, NIPDES, which is, EPA as well as DEP. That permit gets updated every 5 to 10 years. They changed the permit recently, a couple of years ago, added a copper limit to our effluent limit. And, we looked at that, we actually talked to a consultant, and they said, you guys are gonna have to bench scale, pilot scale, test that, you're gonna have to treat, we're gonna have to add treatment. That would have been very capital intensive and costly. We looked at the reason, why do we have this bad copper limit? We just questioned, if you look at Rockport, if you look at SESD, if you look at MWRA on Deer Island, they don't have this copper limit. Why do we have this copper limit? And it turns out that there was a sampling error and a calculation error on EPA's part that otherwise wouldn't have been, would have required all this treatment. So there's always that ability to just question the regulation or question the edict and to hopefully find a better solution. So I think you need to look for kind of the unorthodox approach in those situations.
Back to personnel, just a list of questions I gave you. And again, this is personnel. I'm sure, have you ever fired or laid off an employee? And can you tell us about the experience without giving names?
So when I first started, I was actually told by a few people that this person needed to be fired. And I said, I am not firing somebody without talking to them and giving them a chance to prove themselves as a valuable employee and a benefit to the town. So I told this person that we needed to, there's certain roles and responsibilities that they needed to meet, and that my expectation was that they would be able to do that. That I was watching. They thanked me for the opportunity to prove themselves, and they did okay for a little while, and then they were not doing okay. And so I had to have a difficult conversation with them that this is just not working out, and we're going to post this position, and you're welcome to apply for the position, and we'll see how it goes from there. And they were laid off, and we moved on. So I think you got to give people a chance. You got to talk to them. You got to make sure they understand the expectations. And if they still don't meet the standard, then you have to let them go.
Thank you. And then I asked this question previously, and again, it's a small town, small world, and it's getting smaller and smaller with social media. And there are certain rights that go along with freedom of speech. How did you deal with a situation when you heard about rumors of bullying in a department that you supervise? And bullying, it could be physical, it could be just verbal, it's a broad statement, broad stroke.
So are you saying hypothetically, or it actually happened?
Hypothetical. I'm sure nothing happened.
Well, certainly nothing that I've heard about that I didn't address. So I think, again, you have to, if you hear rumors or see something on social media, if it is brought to your attention, then you need to find out from the victim as well as the perpetrator to make sure that they see it as such. And then you need to get HR involved if it's a serious thing. Again, reiterate what the expectations are. We do have a handbook and code of conduct that speaks to these situations, and you need to enforce it and make them aware of it.
Okay, back to you.
So, with housing being a major issue in Manchester, what are your ideas for growing different types of housing?
So again, this kind of ties into the opportunity. I think once we develop some plans for DPW, I think the big one that has been talked about with the Housing Authority and they put out there is Pleasant Street, and whether or not that can be housed. I think that's definitely one of the things that can happen sooner rather than later. I know we're about to pass a bylaw for the ADU. We were kind of mandated to do that, so it's not necessarily a good thing, but it's something that, we will do, and hopefully that helps, because that's what it is intended to do. I know we've looked at additional housing in certain areas, obviously, there's been the 40B, but also Beaver Dam Road as part of the 3A legislation and passing that bylaw. We've looked at some other property that Gordon has. And so I think these are all things that, we're not in a situation where we can turn down, looking deeply into these things. And I think ultimately, if you look at the master plan talks a lot about housing and developing housing stock. So I think we need to be open to all these things, but, we all hear every day that people love the character of the town and they don't want to overextend the infrastructure and the, so we have to, hopefully, as part of the 3A, they need to develop the aesthetic standards and so that when these projects come forward, they can be approved or they can fit in with the character of the town. So those are important aspects that I think we need to, on the town side, the town hall, select board, planning board, we need to make sure that we execute on those things, and then we need to talk to people, whether it's developers or property owners, on what they envision if they have a project, and try and steer that to meet the requirements of the town. I think an example, it's not housing, but in TST, they had an idea. They wanted to be a partner with the town, and they worked through planning board. I was heavily involved with infrastructure needs and looking at their special permit requirements. And I think that ultimately we got a win-win-win. Town infrastructure got a win, the property owner got a win, as well as the community with the tax base and the select board. So I think we need to follow that example and model when evaluating these projects.
Let's go one more here. So in a small town, it's always a struggle to keep small businesses and the economy going.
You have
Well-
an answer for this one.
How would you describe it is your approach to economic development, and how would you foster it? Do you have any suggestions for improvement over what we're already doing?
This is a hard one. Even in the 7 years I've been here, we've seen a lot of the restaurants and other adjoining businesses that either struggled or have just closed down. And I know there's others that may not be far behind. I don't have a great answer. I think this is something that we as a community need to look into a lot deeper. Certainly from the town side, we should do everything we can to help promote them. I think one of the things that I've been in town and I've talked to a lot of people. I think I've developed a lot of strong relationships. But one, especially if I become the TA, but even if I don't, I would look to work with the Chamber of Commerce, find out what their goals are. I think that would be important. Know that there's something they think the town should be doing, but they would be the ones that would know that, and they would help us help them, then we could do it. I know there's several sort of things that we do in the summer, the Festival by the Sea, and other things that we've tried to kind of spur business, the Gate by the Sea, things like that. So we've also talked, and this is something that we should maybe consider is the idea of closing down either beach or summer and doing some sort of open market, like one Sunday a month in the summer or something like that, where people can bring whatever their wares are or their food, beverage, all that kind of stuff, and have some sort of community event that brings all these businesses out, and the community comes in and shut down traffic, so there's everybody feels safe walking in the street and doing these kind of pop-up things. Those have been successful in other areas. I've been to some, and maybe it's something that we should consider. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
I'm good.
I guess I was. Um, What would, how would you deal with a disagreement with the select board? There are a couple of different kinds of disagreements. Would never happen with us, of course, but suppose the select board decided that this topic is just too ugly to talk about in public session. And it's not one of the topics that are listed as suitable for executive session. How would you approach a board that was taking a wrong-headed approach? And at the same time, how would you approach a situation where you and the board disagree on a subject where it's possible to have different opinions?
So I'll do the last one first, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, so it's not my job necessarily to agree with you. It's to support you in your decision making. So I'm very good at getting additional information, talking to additional people, outside of, that would be my job. My job as DPW director to, gather information and present it in a way that you guys can make informed decisions. That might be doing my own little project on the side where I do research, or it might be just getting out in the community and talking to the affected parties. I'm very happy to, and I've already been out there. We do open houses at our facilities. We do presentations in areas of town to keep the public in the loop, and those are always great opportunities to hear what the public has to say on any given topic. I don't have to agree with you on everything. I think we generally agree on most topics, and I would just hope to be able to give you the information that you need. And certainly, if there's something you don't feel you're getting, I would want you to let me know, and I'm happy to change course and do more to find out the answer. I'm not an expert in everything, but I'm pretty capable. Honestly, there's a lot of DPW aspects that when I first got into DPW, or certainly on the consulting side, I did not do anything with trash and compost and recycling, but I would consider myself a very good expert at this point. So, lots of these things, I'm sure there's other topics that you guys have interest in that I'm not an expert in, but I'm sure I can pick it up and talk about it. So I think generally that's my approach with, disagreements with the board. If I think you're missing something, I hope that I have the relationship that I can tell you you're missing something to help you be better informed, but I don't see it as a personal issue that I need to worry about. First part of the question? Want me to answer the first part of the question?
Sure, please. The second part, which was, there's a disagreement which is a matter of law.
So I guess depending on what it is, I guess I would have to refer to our own town council or talk to you guys, whichever board member has the issue, understand what their worry is or what their expectation is going into something. Obviously, we can't talk about it in an open meeting, then we need to get a second opinion on that. That's the right approach. However, I would say that there is a benefit to being open and transparent to the maximum extent possible. So, assuming there isn't a legal ramification, probably better to just get it out in the open and discuss it. To a certain extent, you don't have to make a decision and vote on it, but get the topic out there and discuss it.
John, I think there was a question, an important question we may have missed in the leadership section around proper relationship with the school district, and I'd like to hear Chuck.
You can ask that question, yes.
Yeah.
That's the only school question on the whole
Yeah,
list.
so it's like, that's not a part of your job today necessarily. So what do you see as a proper relationship with the school district? And what other external relationships, if any, would you try to foster and why?
So the school district, particularly, it's very important to everybody in the community. So I think the town administrator definitely has a role to understand what's going on, what their pressure is. They're probably always going to have budgetary pressures, whether it's insurance or structural in their curriculum, or even capital needs. We've seen that with the Essex school. So certainly those decisions and discussions, they have their own school committee that, needs to, be who they answer to. So, I'm not looking to interfere with that relationship. My role as TA would be to understand that and how it's going to impact us on the town side, which is obviously a very yin and yang relationship. The money that's spent over there is money that's not spent over here. And so like you're talking about forecasting, certainly we need to know what they're talking about in forecasting, because that's going to inform our forecast. So there, there's a number there that always needs to be front and center. Beyond that, I think I have talked with their facilities people, and I have a relationship with them. Of course, if I go to the TA role, I need to talk to the superintendent and her administrator, on the financial operations end. We've always talked about regionalization of services and what can we take on. Now, I've thought about this a lot, because if there was a good answer and a silver bullet, I think I would get a lot of credibility in this situation, in this interview. But it's hard, because a lot of smart people have thought about it before I got here, and they come to the same conclusions. But so I don't think we're going to structurally change the the needs and wants of the school committee, and nor should we. They have a great school, and that's what people want. But if there are opportunities for our savings, or for lack of a better term, regionalization, more partnership with the school, then I would be all for it. Certainly, if there were facility aspects, now that when I first started at DPW, there was no facilities for the entire town. Myself and Nate took that role on out of necessity. Nobody else was doing it, but also there was a lot of needs that had to be addressed, and we became those people. So same thing with the school. If they have issues, do we need to? One of the things that Nate and I have been working on is getting all of our maintenance contracts on a same basis. So the town hall, HVAC gets done, fire department, library, all the facilities all get one contract, no silos between that. It's all facilities. If there were an opportunity to share with the school on those types of things, we should consider it. It hasn't been something that has been done at DPW level, but certainly at the town administrator level, and especially when they're looking at removing positions to address their own structural needs, those conversations should be had.
Your last question.
My last question is, if appointed, what would you hope to say were your accomplishments? And I'm going to say, in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years.
Thank you. So if offered the position, I think I have a unique circumstance that sets me apart from the other candidates, perhaps, which is that I'm already in town hall, and that I can work with Greg on day one. So not 3 months from now or 6 months from now when Greg retires, or when the new TA would likely come on. I'm already here, and I think that's an important distinction. And I know that I don't know everything about being the town administrator, but I have all the confidence in the world that I can work with Greg directly in the next 2 months before he deservedly retires. And I think he would always pick up the phone if I were to call him about some issue that we forgot about when we were doing our succession. So I think that's a very important thing that I would put out there. I think that's something that I would really work with Greg. Certainly I feel like my role as DPW director has put me in a position where I know that I interface with more departments, know that I interface with more boards and committees. That whole governance exercise about trying to reduce the amount of boards and committees that we interface with, but it all has to be done. There's a lot of community needs that we try and meet, because we're all dedicated professionals in that regard. So first and foremost, I think that's one thing I definitely want to say, is that I want to work with Greg to make this change. And it's actually something that we've been working on over the last 12 months. I've gone to Mass Municipal Managers Association meetings, boot camps on these topics for our town administrators. Again, there's always a committee that needs people to. It's one thing I didn't mention before, but when I started as DPW director, I had no DPW director experience, but I had been in leadership roles at the Mass Waterworks Association. I was on the board of directors. I was the president of that association, which interfaces with all water suppliers in the state, as well as legislators and overseeing, vendors. When I started as DPW director, kind of on that same track, I started an Essex County Highway Association, and I've been on the board of directors for the Essex County Highway Association, which is literally an association of all DPW directors in Essex County, and to see how they're doing things, what their pressures are, what their solutions are to these common issues. So I think that in my first 6 months, I would certainly look to get more involved at the Mass Municipal Managers Association level. There's also a Suffolk course where a lot of town employees here have already taken, which is basically a certificate program that talks about all aspects of local government administration. So I think that would be a reasonable goal and expectation over, I think it's a 9 to 12 month course starting in the fall, but the registration actually starts end of April. So these things are all out there. I know they exist, and that's something that I would certainly get involved with. In terms of was it successes or just goals?
Accomplishments. It sounds as if you would spend from your appointment for several months educating yourself.
Right.
What would you take on for the next 6 months?
So we'd want to ensure a smooth transition. We'd want to make sure that there's no gap in, the ability of the TA to support the select board and other town functions. I think that the transition for DPW was also something that I would want to make sure happens smoothly. We have a very cohesive group, and we have a lot of solid momentum in the department, and I'd want to make sure that transitions well. In terms of town business, I think on the horizon, certainly we want to make sure that the CST project goes smoothly and that any resident concerns are addressed for that. We have obviously an important town meeting coming up, but also there might be subsequent town meetings. So that's a town administrator's job, is to make sure that we have a good town meeting, as well as the town moderator. We will likely have a new town moderator, so I will need to get on the same page with that person. I guess we will. Alan's not on the ballot.
It's not on the ballot, and there's only one person who is.
Right. So I have a relationship with Eli. Hopefully we can continue to work on that end of it. So I think these are kind of the thresholds that we want. Obviously, if there's any board initiatives, I'd want to make sure they go successfully. To be honest with you, I can't think of a board initiative right now that is pending. I guess we're going to be kicking off Ocean Street, so that'll be front and center, one way or another, from July 1. Hopefully we have a grant to supplement that project, but if we don't, we'll continue on.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck.
Great.
Well, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for staying, Lorraine.
Well done. Well, all right, now I'll leave it up to you. Honestly.
We haven't adjourned yet.
We haven't
We haven't
adjourned yet.
adjourned yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just want to see what this looks like. Does it have Mary Ann Wood on instead?
We're being
Yeah.
recorded.
Does that ever stop me?
Do you have any advice for us?
So, congratulations, you've completed the interview stage, now the tough stage. You got a decision to make, which you're scheduled for Monday to do. The only advice I give you is when you come back and you talk about your deliberations, talk about the positive attributes, of these candidates. We want to certainly thank the 3 candidates for coming out in a public session. It's very difficult. I've done it myself a few times. It's very difficult to do. So I just want to thank them for their participation. But when you come back in your deliberations, just ask that you keep it on a positive basis. And, pick the person who you think's the best fit for you, to move forward. But everybody's gonna be seeing this, it's live and so on. So that's my only advice on that.
Question for you. I had looked at the deliberation that the town of Concord did
Okay.
a while back. It was, at the time, the town of Danvers hadn't published. Has the town of Danvers, that's a more recent
Who's the paper?
deliberation, have they,
Who's the paper?
no, I mean the video, their video has.
I would assume it's online.
Okay.
I haven't
If
looked.
not, I would definitely encourage people, because, I've interviewed a bunch of people a bunch of times, but never publicly deliberated on a
Mhm.
roll. I found it very helpful. So I just mentioned if the one in Danvers is not out there, the one from Concord is. It was like
Yeah.
5 or 6 years ago or
I
something.
was at a meeting last night in Sutton, and they did an excellent job, talking about,
The deliberation, yeah.
their choice of the candidate. Again, as long as you keep it on, a positive side, and, there's always plenty to talk about with candidates like this, and you're comparing what they can bring to the table. I've been in some ugly ones, I could say, and there's no need to, take people down, especially since they put themselves out,
Right.
for a community.
Right.
It's sad that I've seen a couple like that, but in this case, as long as you keep it, most, 95% of these, discussions are very good amongst the board. You folks understand, the situation, and again, it's choosing, the candidate without having to take down, another candidate.
Right.
Put forward who you think is your, your best candidate, and you have your discussions, and then you deliberate. And sometimes it's a split vote. And the only thing I would ask is if there's a split vote, you come back and attempt to do a unanimous vote. No problem with the split vote, that happens. But then if you can come back, if it's a 3-2, if you can come back and do a 5-0, to give the, whoever the chosen person is, moving forward, a sense that we're willing to work, with that situation. But again, that doesn't always occur. Those are just a couple of comments.
Doesn't matter what the vote is, that whoever is selected, we all need to support them, period.
And that's why you come back, potentially with a, if there's a split vote, that's why you have 5 members. No problem with that. But once the vote is taken, this is very critical that the person knows that, the whole board's willing to work with the person going forward.
So would you do that with the contract? So the contract could be 5-0.
The contract can be 5-0, but typically we ask, at that meeting, because you're gonna negotiate with the person.
Right.
So, at least you're giving this person the sense going into the contract that, yeah, it's not a reconsideration, it's just I move that, vote, revote, for support of the candidate.
Right. So all 3 candidates are on the table, and if somebody gets 3 votes, you're done with that. Correct? Candidate A gets 3 votes, candidate B gets 1 vote, candidate C gets 1
Yes.
vote. You're done. If somebody gets a majority, and there are 5 of us, it could be 2-2-1, then you got a
Right.
problem.
So what you'll be doing is, someone needs to make a motion as to one candidate. And
And
there'll
that's
be,
my question.
Yes, typically, you don't each, you can each state your preference, but then there needs to be a motion to appoint
Okay, all right.
a particular person.
Mhm.
And then, again, that vote could be for 1, 3-2, or 5-0,
So that's why I found it helpful to watch at least the Concord one. I want to see if the one from Danvers is out
Okay.
there. The Concord one, the chair of the board actually took a straw poll, which I wasn't sure was appropriate at the beginning of a deliberation. It didn't feel right,
You're
but,
cutting off.
yeah, well, you're going to debate, but first, take a straw poll. So you learn both positive and not so positive
Yeah,
ways.
there's, I've been to meetings
so
where
there are
the
probably
first
lots
thing
of
said
different
is a
ways.
motion to appoint a candidate.
Yeah.
And I've seen that a few times, and again, each of you, I think one of the better ways, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, is that each of you have your say, going through. You say, okay, here's what I saw, and have that discussion, and whether you put a candidate, you say, here's my top choice in that discussion, that's, but the idea is to have a deliberation, as to the 3 candidates.
All right, and so somebody has to make a motion on a candidate. Somebody has to make a move.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
And then,
So it's not, you can't do a straw poll and say,
No.
okay, it's 3-1-1. The motion needs to be for a particular person. You have a second, and then you take a vote. If you can't get a 3 on that, then someone proposes a second
Okay.
name potentially,
Understood.
okay?
All right, and that's an offer, there isn't any money involved at this point? This is
No,
just to offer
so
a
it's
position?
to appoint so-and-so on the condition of a successful contract negotiation.
Okay, and that comes after. Okay,
You've already done reference and background check, which we provided to you. So you do it, subject to a successful contract negotiation. And that's where, then you need to be ready to, immediately after whoever's, negotiating the contract, whichever, how the board's gonna do that, you should be prepared to get going for that, so that this isn't holding up, that discussion. Most places get it done in less than 2 weeks. Some places take a little bit more time, and for various reasons. Greg wants to know right away. But yeah, so if you can be prepared on Monday night that you're ready, the next day there's whoever's, making the contact is contacting the candidate, when are we gonna meet? Have the discussion, and so on and go forward,
So the negotiations that were in executive session?
No, you don't negotiate as a board with the candidate. You have two of your, two members of the board
Okay,
negotiate, but then you come back to your board to make sure, the board is in executive session, to discuss the conditions of the contract.
Do they negotiate their own side, or do they usually bring in another party?
Typically their own, so they don't, they may have an attorney, there's a couple of attorneys who work with, the municipal association.
Right.
There's a set rules, as long as you're within the guidelines that everybody thinks are the guidelines, you'll be fine. The 3 big things are gonna be, pay, severance, and vacation time. So those are, the rest of it typically falls under the town's sections of, sick leave, all the other things typically fall with the norms of what's happening in the community.
So 2 of you would lead that negotiation, you'd have town council to help you with that.
Yep. So they can discuss with you, I mean, you have out there what the plus or minus is, when this was publicized, and so now it's coming down to, well, what's that gonna be? And do you set in the conditions of the contract this year's pay and then next year's pay as well? So those are the type of things you need to, figure out as to where you're gonna go.
how long
Of course.
how long is your contract?
It's been 3 years.
3?
And that's the norm,
Okay,
especially for a first out, as a 3-year deal. And you've got Greg's contract as, that's usually the basis of, yeah.
Why not that
Change the
name?
name.
Just obliterate it.
Yeah, and with his name, any other name's
Blocks
gonna
are
fit
clean.
in.
Yeah,
He's got more letters than the average, so all the others will definitely fit in there.
okay.
I move to adjourn.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.